Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jared Campbell, and I'm excited to welcome you here with us today to talk about scheduling with Dr. Michael Rettig. Dr. Rettig is the founder of School Scheduling Associates, LLC. He spent 15 years as a professor in the College of Education and director of the Center for School Learning at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He retired from JMU as professor emeritus in June 2006 to work full-time with schools. In addition to his work in higher education, he taught public school in New York or in Syracuse, New York for 10 years and served as a school principal in Virginia for 6 years. Over the past 29 years, Dr. Rettig has served as a consultant on school scheduling issues in 43 states with over 1,000 schools nationally and internationally in Bermuda, Canada, Dubai, Germany, India, Japan, the Netherlands, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Spain, and the United Kingdom. He has also conducted hundreds of workshops and has co-authored with R.L. Kennedy numerous articles and books on school scheduling and related topics, including Book Scheduling, a Catalyst for Change in High Schools in 1995, Scheduling Strategies of Middle Schools in 2000, and Elementary School Scheduling Enhancing Instruction for Student Achievement in 2008. As past president and board member of the Virginia Association of Curriculum and Supervision, he has received many awards, including the Service Award from the Shenandoah chapter of Phi Delta Kappa. He was also named a Madison Scholar at James Madison University and was the recipient of the Outstanding Graduate Student Award through Phi Delta Kappa at the University of Virginia. He and his wife, Sally, live in Charlottesville, Virginia. Together, they have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rettig.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm happy to be here. Greetings from Charlottesville, Virginia, where I am right now, where it's a beautiful day, about 75 degrees. You're in Pennsylvania right now, of course, the center of the universe, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of days in the center of the universe. Just a few other things that I would like to share about my background, and it's something I always do because I'm a fortunate man, and I'm quite proud of my family, and so I would like to share that if I can figure out how to get out of this. There we go. Oh, get rid of that. Where are we? Sorry, too much junk. This is my family. I've been married to Sally for 46 years. We have 3 children. Dan, who is one of you guys, he's in his 20th year of teaching. He's a middle school math teacher at Short Pump Middle School in Henrico County Public Schools. He's been fully virtual since the middle of March, much more organized this beginning of the school year. His school is actually on a block schedule of a 8AB, 4 classes one day for the next. He teaches 6 every other day. And they start out the school year, and they're normally 95-minute blocks in face-to-face instruction. They start out in 75-minute blocks, and everybody discovered that was too much. So that what they're doing now is doing 60-minute blocks. Gave teachers another hour of planning, which they really need, as you all know. And you know, he's a vet, and 20 years. He said it's the hardest year he's had in teaching. And he, like everyone else, says he feels like a first-year teacher. His wife's an elementary counselor in the same district. They've been totally virtual there. She's in a little urban ring school in Henrico County, butts the city of Richmond. 99% free and reduced lunch, 60% E&L students. A great little school, and but a tough road to hoe in this environment for them. They're getting ready to go hybrid at the beginning of December. But they've been totally virtual so far this year. They've 2 children, Sean and Carter Quinn. Sean's a 7th grader, and Carter Quinn's a 3rd grader, totally virtual so far. This is my youngest child, Allison. She's a JMU grad, just like her brother and sister-in-law are. Married to Dave, a Shenandoah University grad, salesperson. She's a banker in the Charlottesville area. And they have 2 children, this guy right here, RJ, who's in a little 4-person pod, a first grade pod, totally virtual. And they only have 4 days of school per week in our district, and each one of the parents in the pod takes 1 day a week to supervise the both synchronous and asynchronous learning that's going on in their little pod of 2 kindergartners and 2 first graders. And this is his little brother, Thomas, 3 years old, who's downstairs with my wife right now. We take on some care for them while their parents work at home. This is my middle child, Ann, here, who's a University of Richmond grad, UVA med school grad. She's the team physician she's a sports medicine physician in Washington, D.C., and also the team physician for the 2019 world champion Washington Mystics, the WNBA franchise in Washington. And her husband, Drew, is a cardiac MRI specialist at a hospital center in D.C. And they have 3 children. This guy, Elliot, who's a first grader, 6 years old, and twin girls, Katie and Quinn. Just one little side note before we get rolling on real content here, and that is I've felt some of your pain, probably not as much in the work that I do, and what happened last spring and continues to happen. I was finishing up a job in Detroit when things started to go quite south, and in early March, middle March, and drove down to Cleveland to finish up some work there. And then decided I was not taking another airplane. And so drove all the way home to Charlottesville to get rid of the car. Well, that Friday, my home district here, Albemarle County, which is a fine school district, decided they were going virtual. And so on Monday of that next week, I started Poppy School with this guy right here. My wife and I took on childcare for the 2 of them, but I was running, a kindergarten program for this guy, and we worked about 4 hours a day, I would guess, and all the normal subjects. And then after a week of that, my daughter from DC says, "Well, what about Elliot? He was in kindergarten too." So we started Zooming him in. So 3 hours a day, 3-hour-long sessions per day for 4 days a week. We had Poppy School. And that went on for 13 weeks. At the end of that time, as you might guess, I was exhausted, like all of you were too. But they're both in fully virtual programs now. He's in Washington, D.C. public schools, and this guy is, as I told you, in a little 4-person pod in the Albemarle County public schools. So that's that. That's the fam. And a little bit about our experiences, what's going on now. So what are we going to do here? We're going to talk about scheduling, and my basic plan is this. We're going to talk first about high school scheduling models. I mean, we can't just jump into things that support MTSS. We have to talk about universal instruction as well. So I'm going to talk some about the high school scheduling models that are out there, what people are using, why they're using them, and I'll try to and some of those models, of course, are also used by middle school folks. There are high school scheduling models that no middle school would ever use. And there are also some middle school models no high school would ever use, but there are many overlapping ones that are used by both. So we're going to start with kind of the high school scheduling models. We're going to segue sort of midway into that to talk about this community lunch period that's being adopted all across the country, but very heavily in the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania areas, because it has the potential to be very useful in MTSS as a way to deliver both Tier 1 and Tier 2 kinds of interventions. So we'll talk about that in some detail as part of our high school thing. Then I'll segue into talking about some scheduling models that are more middle schooly, more uniquely middle schooly, and we'll do that. In the midst of that, we'll talk about implementing the intervention enrichment period, which is another vehicle that schools use to support through scheduling their delivery of interventions to students and enrichment programs. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion or talk about how to go through a process to change your schedule. So just to put scheduling in the context of student achievement, when we think about the factors that impact student achievement, there are 3 broad sets: the school factors, the teacher factors, the student factors. The student factors, most of us are public school folks. We don't have any control over that. Kids walk in the door. It's our challenge and the beauty of public education. But we do have school and teacher factors that we have some control over. When you think about what impacts student learning the most, everybody on the Zoom call, every teacher and every administrator in the country knows the answer to that question. It's the quality of the teacher you put in front of students every day. And everything else pales in comparison to that in terms of its impact on student achievement. How does that relate to schedule? Well, we want to schedule at least let a teacher do the best job they can, so we don't have the schedule to get in their way. So that's one impact of that. And sometimes the schedule can get in people's way of doing the best job that they need to be able to do. When you drill down a little further and look at the other factors that impact student achievement, the next one, the next broad set is those school-based factors, those kind of administrative organizational factors that we have a lot of control over in schools. And the number one factor is called opportunity to learn. And that opportunity to learn factor in the research was basically defined as, did the school align its curriculum with what students were going to be assessed on? Did they, through their curricular, supervisory, instructional practices, make sure that aligned curriculum was actually taught to the students? Did they measure occasionally, using some form of assessment tool, student learning to determine whether or not they were learning that curriculum? And finally, did they intervene when they discovered they weren't learning it? And so it's the whole kind of MTSS process that we're talking about there. When you think about the parts of those that relate to scheduling, when we talk about having to teach that basic curriculum, do we have enough time to deliver? Many curricula that we have prescribed time amounts. I mean, if you look at some of the middle school curricula right now, they, the minimum amount of time that mathematics is usually required is about an hour. Well, how do you do that if you got 42 minutes in your periods? How are we doing that? If to implement the program with fidelity, you don't have enough time in that, it's a problem. So that's part of it. The notion of when to intervene too, as part of this opportunity to learn factor. When can we intervene? Because we're always confronted with the prime rule of school scheduling, which is if you put something in, you got to take something out. And so looking for a place to intervene for students without disrupting too much the delivery of universal instruction and other activities for students is a challenge in building the schedule. The third factor that impacts student achievement, though less than this opportunity to learn factor, and certainly less than the quality of the teacher you put in front of students, is the amount of time you do something. And time is not a panacea. Just because they give you more time doesn't mean, if I double the amount of time you do something, doesn't mean you're going to get double the achievement. But time does have an impact. It does have an impact in terms of increasing student achievement. More time is more likely to give the opportunity for students to learn. So I'm going to start my talk a bit talking about secondary schedules, high school schedules, and I'm going to roll through a variety of them pretty quickly. The modern American secondary school has its roots in the middle of the 19th century when the one-room schoolhouses around our country began to consolidate into larger institutions. We basically only had two institutions at the time, the elementary school, which was generally grades 1 through 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. There was no kindergarten back in the day. And the secondary school that was generally grade 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 through 11 or 12, depending on how many years they went in that area. Back in the day, I remember looking at some old schedules that came from the middle of the 19th century. I saw one schedule from the West Coast that only had 5 classes that kids were engaged in. That was it. And then I saw an old schedule from a prep school on the East Coast in the Boston area, and kids were engaged in 13 different things over the course of the week, some short, some long, some once, some multiple times during the week. There was a lot of variety among the new secondary schools in our country. And that persisted until the early part of the 20th century, when a committee was formed and funded by a grant from the Carnegie Foundation. This committee was made up primarily of post-secondary educators in the Boston area. There were some secondary ed folks there. And they were challenged with setting some standards for this new American secondary school to what did it mean to be prepared for the world of work? What did it mean to be prepared for post-secondary education? What is the program we should deliver to students to prepare them for those possibilities? What are the parts of that program? What subjects should be in it? How much of each subject? How should we account for it? How will we know when they're done with that program? These were questions they had to ask and answer to come up with some standards. And one of the things they did as part of their work was they set a standard that has stuck with us for over 100 years now. And that is they coined the term and set the standard for the Carnegie Unit. Carnegie Unit was, their recommendation was that a high school credit be 120 hours of instruction over the course of the school year. When that definition came about, school districts around the country began to adopt a schedule that delivered something like that because it was interpreted by many people to be 120-hour-long classes. So early in our school history, the 6-period day became a standard schedule around the country. In the 6-period day, the classes were about an hour long in them. And if you went 120 days of school, you get 120 hours of instruction. And that was kind of the way it was interpreted. Lunch was a separate shorter period built in and around those periods. And teaching loads varied. Teaching loads vary depending, even today, where you are in the country and what's going on there. Back in the day, and for the most part today, the teaching load in this schedule is 5 out of 6, and you have 1 period for your preparation. I've been in a few fortunate districts, Chappaqua, New York, Mamaroneck, New York, some middle schools in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, where the teaching load is 4 out of 6 in this schedule, pretty nice gig. And I've been some places where the teaching load in this schedule is all 6 class periods. Remember working in Hawaii a number of years back, and there were about 50 high schools in Hawaii. And at the time, if you were on a 6-period day and you taught high school there, you taught all 6 of the class periods and had no preparation time while the students were in school. I guess that was the price of living in paradise, no planning period. So there was that. In the state of Ohio, where I worked a lot during the 2008-2010 times, there were a number of schools there who fired a lot of elective teachers as a way of balancing their budgets during those lean times. And teachers taught all 6 or all 7 of the class periods they had in their schedule without a break during the day. That's the way they balanced the budget. But for the most part, teaching load in this schedule is 5 out of 6. Curricular-wise, well, there's room for English and math and science and social studies and world language and PE and health, and not much room for anything else. And so where's the room for the arts or technology or CTE or any kinds of classes like that might be the passion courses that kids would love to be able to take? There wasn't much room in that. So what began to happen in this schedule was people began to band-aid it to be able to have kids take more classes. Districts around the country offered early bird classes where a kid could come in before school and take a class to open up the rest of their schedule during the day. Or there were classes offered after school in some places where kids can come and do that. Many schools around the country had big summer school programs. I remember working with the Homewood Flossmoor district outside of Chicago. They had a 6-course plan, and they had about 3,000 kids in the high school. About 1,500 went to summer school every year, and it wasn't remedial. It was to take a required class to open up the schedule to allow them to take an elective during the regular school year. This problem of not enough room for choice in the schedule was exacerbated in the 80s when another report came out, A Nation at Risk, which was highly critical of high schools, specifically the shopping mall high school and all that. It criticized the rigor of high schools. And so what happened is, as a result of that, is states interpreted rigor. The way to make their schools more rigorous was to increase graduation requirements. Or the number of credits for graduation. And so states across the country that maybe had 14 or 15 or 16 credits for graduation. Now we're looking at, 22, 23, 24, 26 in my state of Virginia for the advanced diploma. I've seen as high as 30 credits required locally for high school graduation. And as most of those credits that were required by the state were in the core areas, it edged people out of electives even more than they were in before that report came out and the responses to it. So schools began to change their schedules. The Band-Aids didn't work anymore. What did they do? Shorten the periods and added another one. The most common single period schedule in the country is a 7-period day, periods somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 50 minutes. Teaching loads in this schedule vary depending on the existence of union, the strength of the union, and the affluence of the community you might happen to be in. I've been in 2 public school divisions, one in Ohio and one in New York, where the teaching load in a 7-period day was actually 4 out of 7, a truly sweet gig. That's true in some independent schools as well. If you're in a pretty strong union state, which would include parts of Pennsylvania, but certainly not all of Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, Illinois, if you're in a 7-period day, you're likely to be teaching 5 classes in that and then have a duty and a prep as your other 2 periods. But in most of the rest of the country, good parts of Pennsylvania, in the South, the West, if you're in a 7-period day, you're teaching 6 out of the 7 class periods in that, and with 1 for your preparation. What's this whole teaching load thing about? Well, it's about money, because there's only 3 factors that impact the cost of the school schedule. 1, what do you pay teachers on the salary scale? 2, of the available periods the students can take, how many do the teachers have to teach? Because it's pretty obvious, if a teacher only has to teach 4 out of 7 periods, I'm going to need more teachers than if they teach 5 out of 7 or 6 out of 7. And finally, how many kids are willing to put into a section? Because the more kids I put in sections, the fewer sections I need and the fewer teachers I need. It's kind of end of formula. By the way, all of those things were manipulated during the budget problems we had beginning in 2008. Bigger class sizes, higher teacher loads, stagnant or even lowered teacher salaries as a response to the lack of funding. Hopefully we're not headed there again. I worry. So in a 7-period day, we got more curriculum room now. We got room for English, math, science, social studies, world language, PE and health. Got room for another elective too. You can be in the band or the orchestra, take an art class or a technology class. Got a little more room there, but that wasn't enough for some schools in the country. And when you go to the affluent Northeast and you go to suburbs, Midwestern cities, you'll often find that the basic standard schedule there is an 8-period day. Now that we've added 8 periods, we've shortened the periods a bit. 8-period day comes in a couple of different formats, one of which to me isn't truly an 8-period day, because lunch is now equal to a period. And in this particular case, there are 8 periods in the day, but lunch is occupying, in my simple example here, 3 of them. So some students and some teachers would eat lunch in each of those 3 periods. The reason I still call it an 8-period day is because some high schools, and I've been in 2 middle schools across the country that actually do this too, but some high schools routinely allow students to waive lunch to take an 8th class period in the schedule, which I think is an awful practice. I understand how it happens and why it happens and how hard it is to get rid of it if you do it. But it is not good for students, I don't think, to allow that. Some school districts don't allow it by policy, but kind of what happens, I think, is that there's this genius in the building, this kid, guy or girl, they're happy-go-lucky. They could take 10 courses and it wouldn't stress them out at all. And they say, I'd like to take another class and, it's happening during lunch. Would that be okay? Somebody gives them permission. And that kid has no problem with it because they're, they can just handle all of that. They're great multitaskers. They can handle it. But now we've created a slippery slope. Now we have a student who has a transcript that looks different than everybody else's transcript in his building, in his school, because he's been able to take another course. And we all know what the first line of cut when you're trying to apply to college is. It's, did you take the most rigorous program available at your school? Now we had someone who took a more rigorous program. And so the Joneses start to follow along. And the first 5 to 10 kids, they're kind of like him or her, and it's not a problem. But we start getting down the list a bit, and now we're creating stress. Lots of stress. The worst I ever saw this was in a school in New York where they had 9 41-minute periods in the day. Lunch could be in several of them. And then there was a 10th period at the end of the school day where all the music programs resided. So if you're in band, orchestra, choir, you stayed for 10th period. They had any number of students who were waiving lunch so they could take 10 straight periods today. And then, you know what they were talking about? This was in Westchester County. All over that county, they're talking about student mental health and well-being. Well, do you think it's a good idea for somebody to have 10 straight 41-minute periods a day, juggle all those subjects without a break during the day and all that work to do? I'm not sure that's good for anybody's mental health. Teachers would file a grievance if they were assigned them, but we allow students to do it. Well, the more typical 8-period day is a 8-period schedule where we have 8 equal periods, and lunch is typically separate and shorter and built in and around those periods. The period length in this kind of the lunch period almost always in schools across the country is about 30 minutes for teachers and 30 minutes for students. That's generally the same. Occasionally it's not, which is a pain in the schedule if it's not, as some of you are shaking your heads yes, who have that problem in your schools. This 8-period day, periods generally in the 40 to 45-minute range in here. Depending on the length of the school day, the length of the school day varies around the country pretty dramatically. The shortest school day I ever saw was a district in Pennsylvania, who at one time had 5 hours and 55 minutes in their student day. I believe they were violating state law. They no longer do. They increased it. And the longest school day I ever saw was in New York City. It was Bronx Health Science. It's a public charter that had students from school from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, a 9-hour school day. That lasted for about 2 or 3 years, and then they had a high turnover rate in teachers and shortened it to about 7.5 hours. The typical high school day rate, the longest high school day I've seen now has been in Texas and in Wisconsin at 7 hours and 45 minutes. The typical high school and middle school day rate right now around the country is about 7 hours, is about 7 hours. So in an 8-period day, now we got a lot more room, be in English, math, science, social studies, world language, PE and health, and have room for a couple of electives too. But notice something that's been happening as we add periods to the schedule. When we were in a 6-period day, each of the classes we got about 60 minutes a day. When we were in a 7-period day, each of the classes we had got about 50 minutes a day. When we're in an 8-period day, now each of the classes we have gets about 40 to 45 minutes a day. So while we're increasing students' choice, it comes at a price, and the price is the number of instructional minutes in the classes that they do take, dramatically reduced as we add periods to the day. Which is a trade we're often willing to make, but it's problematic for some students. And schools, especially middle schools, when these periods start to get smaller, start to worry that 43 minutes is not enough for a full language arts program to be delivered to students, or a full math program to be delivered to students. And have 80% of those kids, kind of an RTI terminology, be successful in that program. So this is when time starts to rear its head in people's thinking about the schedule. Is the time we're providing for our classes sufficient for universal instruction? And kind of the rule I have is RTI terminology, kind of, can 80% of our kids master the curriculum in that amount of time, knowing that we'll have to do Tier 1 intervention during instruction, and Tier 2 probably in an intervention period or a community lunch, and Tier 3 is a replacement course for some other class in the system. So it's something to think about. Is every once in a while I'll be working in a place that we'll be talking about intervention needs and all that, and they'll say, well, 75% of our kids need intervention. Well, 75% of your kids need an intervention. We don't have an intervention problem. We have a universal instruction problem. And we need to get that fixed because those numbers are way out of whack. So 8-period day, teaching loads vary depending on the existence of a union, the strength of the union, and the affluence of the community. In the most affluent union states in the country, you'd find a teaching load of 5. Worked in with the middle schools in Chappaqua, New York, 5 40-minute periods they were teaching. Pretty sweet. The typical teaching load in a 6-period day around the country is 6 out of 8. And you'll find a few places, and I found them in Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and Wisconsin, and Texas, and West Virginia, where the teaching load in an 8-period day is 7 out of 8 class periods, which is a pretty tough row to hoe. Have one little 40-minute period for planning a day and 30-minute lunch. A lot of those schools that I found that have these kind of 8-period schedules like that, where teachers teach 7, are in rural areas where if you're the Spanish teacher, you're the department, and you've got 5 different preps out of your 6 classes you're teaching, and it's a bit of a tough row to hoe. So 8 periods isn't the end of the story. Some schools take and make lunch equal to a period in a 9-period day. That does have an advantage. There is an advantage to making lunch the length of a period. It's a dangerous advantage, but it's an advantage because now I have 9 slots to schedule courses. So from scheduling my singletons and of course, scheduling standpoint, I've got more room than an 8-course schedule with a separate shorter lunch. But of course, this makes you, I call it dangerous because there is then the temptation to allow student waive lunch and take a 9th period in the schedule. The most periods I've seen in any high school in the country were 10. That was in a school in New York who had 10 36-minute periods. And interestingly enough, it's high school. And so that means that a kid who is in a high school in New York taking 36 minutes of US history every day, got 1 credit on their transcript at the end of the course, and a kid in Kentucky taking US history for 55 or 60 minutes every day got 1 credit of US history on their transcript. You would think the one in the longer class period might learn a little more over the course of the year. And that's because the Carnegie Unit recommendation of 120 hours was just that. It was just a recommendation. It was not required. They had no authority, and and it was adopted differentially by states around the country. And the highest seat time requirement for a course in the country is in Kentucky, which is 150 hours, which is the equivalent of a 50-minute class period daily or a 100-minute block for a semester every other day. The next highest is 140 hours, which is my state of Virginia. That's a 47-minute period or 94-minute block. Georgia has 135 hours. That's a 45-minute period, 90-minute block. The most common standard is still the old Carnegie Unit standard, which is 120 hours, which is a 40-minute period daily or a 80-minute block. And the lowest is New York, which is 108 hours, the equivalent of a 36-minute period, 180 days over the school year. I asked the question. I'll give you like 2 seconds to think about it. Do you know what the standard is in Pennsylvania? What is the seat time requirement for high school courses in Pennsylvania? 1, 2, 3. Stop trying. You don't have one. It was done away with years ago. Pennsylvania, like a number of other states, is reputed to be standards-based, which means students earn credit when they've mastered the standards of the course. How we measure and determine that and certify it, well, that's another story, not for this session. But you're among a growing number of states who have realized that just because you have your fanny in the chair doesn't mean you learned anything. And so Rhode Island, Ohio, Wisconsin, Washington, Oregon, lots of states have done away with the Carnegie Unit seat time requirement. Most of those states still have a yearly annual minutes of instruction or hours of instruction requirement for the school year. But they don't break it down into courses. They don't break it down into courses. I think the most common standard is about 990 hours of instruction. The most periods I've ever seen in a middle school are 11 periods. And I think it was a school in central Pennsylvania. They did double some of them. The periods were 34 minutes in length. There was a doubling. Let me see if I can count them. 2 ELA, 2 math, 1 science, 1 social studies, 2 encore, periods, and an intervention period, a lunch period. I'm missing one. I don't know where it went. Maybe there were 3 encore periods. I don't remember. But it was 11 34-minute periods. To review, about half the schools in the country still in periods. Periods as long as about an hour in a 6-period day, all the way down to 36 or 34 minutes in a middle school, 36 in a high school, up to 10 or 11 periods. The most common single period schedule in the country is a 7-period day with periods right around 50 minutes with a teaching load of about 6 out of 7 class periods. That would be the most common thing you would find in the country. There's been 2 attempts to change the way that we schedule secondary schools around the country. The first of those attempts was precipitated by a book written by a guy, believe it or not, named Trump. The book came out in 1959. Scheduling the Secondary School was called, and it had some clever ideas. He suggested we divide the school year into 15-minute modules, and that we combine multiple 15 minutes. So divide your school day, not school year, school day into modules, 15 minutes. Then combine multiple modules together to form periods of differing lengths. So for those subjects and disciplines that favor frequency of meeting over duration of class period, like mathematics, and I'm stereotyping here, but mathematics, world language, performing arts, those subjects tend to favor meeting more frequently over a meeting for longer periods of time, frequency over duration. They might get assigned 5 3-mod classes per week with each of their sections, or a 45-minute class every day. For those subjects willing to give up some frequency to gain some duration in their class periods, to do more hands-on, problem-based learning, project-based learning kinds of things, well, they might get assigned 2 or 3 6-mod classes per week. And that might be in the visual arts or in technology, CTE classes, English even, or social science, depending on the teachers, I suppose. And then, of course, we have the schizophrenic science folks who want a little bit of both. Wouldn't it be nice if they could have 2 3-mod classes a week at about 45 minutes and have a couple of 6-mod classes a week too for laboratory work? Another part of the whole flexible scheduling mod idea was the notion that we might have some groupings that were larger than others. We might have some, a kickoff lecture of the week that was 100 kids, and then we'd break down into discussion groups, more like college, of 20 or 25 kids for the rest of the week. There were notions like that built into the schedule. At its height, about 15% of the high schools and junior high schools, its height was in the late 60s and early 70s, were on a flexible modular, we're trying to do a flexible modular schedule. Those of you that are here, you probably have something to do with scheduling in your school. And as I described the parameters of flexible modular scheduling, you're thinking, how did they do that? And the answer is not very well. There were problems. What were the problems? Well, there were holes in the school schedules. There were holes in teacher schedules, not a big problem. They kind of like that. There were holes in student schedules. And it was an issue because a kid might have a 3-mod class and then have 1 or 2 free mods after that. And then maybe they had a 6-mod class and then another open mod or 2 or 3. And while every school had an administrative plan for where students were allowed to be and what they were allowed to do during their free mods, on occasion, students had other ideas about what they were going to do with those free mods that did not jibe with the approved administrative list. I remember meeting a teacher in New Jersey, 15 or 20 years ago, I guess, when I was doing a session like this. And she said, oh, yeah, we had that schedule one year when I was in high school. That's the year I learned how to smoke, because she was going to the back of the building with her buddies to have a cigarette during the free mods. Administrators were tearing their hair out, too, because every 15 minutes in the building, a class was changing, and they didn't really know who was supposed to be in the hallways. Couldn't very well do a hall sweep and all. So while it went and grew to 15% of the schools in the country, it has declined ever since. There's been a bit of resurgence recently in it because it is the most flexible schedule that is utilized by high schools anywhere in the country. And that is because it is not a one-size-fits-all schedule. Teachers liked it. Why? They got their classes offered in the fashion that they wanted, and they didn't have to compromise and have a schedule that suited the average needs of a teacher versus the particular needs of their discipline. every other schedule that I'll talk about today is, for the most part, a one-size-fits-all schedule. If you're in a period schedule, that kind of a schedule favors people who prefer frequency of meeting over duration of class period. If you're in a straight block schedule, whether it's a 4x4 and an 8AB or whatever, you're in a schedule where everybody's in pretty much the same format, and it favors duration over frequency, because you might only have 90 meetings a year. The flexible modular schedule is the only one that really is not a one size fits all. By the way, I said that it was adopted by 15% of the high schools and junior high schools around the country, declined to only a handful around the country. There are still some that do it. They tend to be very high-powered academic preparatory institutions for college, treat high school way more like college. And there are no middle schools who do it, none that I'm aware of anyway, that do this kind of schedule. So beginning in the late 70s in Canada, we have the start of the block scheduling movement, which is the second way that we've begun to change schedules. And tell me I didn't even put that in this presentation. I kind of didn't. Oh well, I'll just show this and we'll talk about it from here. Did I not? Where's your brain, Mike? So I was piecing this together from multiple other presentations, and I'll talk about it here. So forget the title on that, and we're going to call it a 4x4, and this is going to be semester 1, semester 2. So beginning in the late 70s, some schools across Canada began to semesterize their timetables. When you go up into UK country, go to UK countries, they don't call it school schedules, the school timetable. And when you're building it, you're timetabling, and you're using timetabling software, and you're the timetabler. If you were to look up online timetabling software, you'd find vendors for software, scheduling software you haven't seen before. And so what I mean by semesterize their schedule, well, kids took 4 classes first semester, remember, not a day, semester 1, for 4 classes first semester, finished a full unit of work in those classes because those blocks were double length periods, and then took 4 the next semester. That schedule grew in Canada and dropped into the States in the very late 80s. The first schools I knew that did it were in Colorado in the late 80s. They wrote about it. They presented about it, and it jumped to the East Coast in the early 90s. One of your high schools, Haverhill Horsham, started in the very early 90s. And we had schools in Maryland and Virginia started in like the 92, 93 school year, North Carolina as well. That 4x4 schedule, a semester block schedule, sometimes called the accelerated schedule places, developed up and down the middle Atlantic states and started working its way back west. My best guess, and I wouldn't quote me on this, is that about 10 to 15% of the high schools in the country operate some kind of a 4x4 schedule. Which after I'm done with this session, I will update my handout with the slides that were supposed to be in here for that, and I'll give it back to the folks to post if you want to go back and get it. And are on a 4x4 schedule. Why do people adopt the 4x4 schedule? It has several attractive aspects to it. One is a reduction in concurrent teacher and student load. In the typical 4x4 schedule, which has 4 blocks that meet daily for a semester, teachers teach 3 of the blocks, usually no more than 2 preps in that, most places. And so they only have 3 classes of students for that first 90 days. They do get 3 new ones the second 90 days, but at that time, there's only 3 pages of the grade book, probably 75 to 90 kids that you have. It feels vastly different than teaching 5 or 6 classes a day. And the other thing is students. From a student load perspective, the kids are only taking 4 classes at a time. And those 4 classes meet daily, and it's likely there are only 2 or 3 hardcore test project producers of those 4. And so the load for students is reduced. They take 4 new ones the next semester, yes, but the load is reduced. There are a couple other nice aspects of it. The 4x4, of course, has an acceleration possibility. if we were to have a student who we did not identify in middle school for Algebra 1 and they took Algebra 1 first semester every day and knocked it out of the park, we could let them take geometry second semester and now they'd be on the calc track. On the other end of the spectrum, if we got a kid who takes Algebra 1 first semester and bombs it, we have an opportunity to stay on graduation track by taking it second semester. Or if we're a senior who takes our senior English first semester of 12th grade and it does not exert any effort, they have another opportunity to come back and do it and still graduate on time. So we're not inclined to give them the gift D then. There are a number of issues with the 4x4 schedule that people worry about. They tend to be things like it doesn't work well for certain disciplines, like it does not work well for band, orchestra, or choir that must go year long unless you adapt the schedule. And there are good ways to adapt the schedule and bad ways to adapt the schedule for those disciplines. Here's a bad way. In Colorado, when they first adopted the schedule, most of the schools there decided to go give a double block to band and orchestra and choir. They would get a block every day all year long. And what happened? Well, it was kind of great, except that enrollments dropped off a cliff because nobody was willing to commit to a quarter of their time in that class. And so the way that most schools adapt the schedule is by embedding either skinnies or alternate day blocks into the schedule, which makes it harder to build. There's no question that it makes it harder to build when you're doing that, but it makes it a better schedule as well. That same adaptation, either embedding skinnies or an AB block into the 4x4 schedule is also used for AP, which has a testing issue with it, as you well know, and for a variety of other courses that have to match up. I'm not going into it in great detail. We have lots more to do today. There's a lot of inner working issues of scheduling the 4x4. I'm a fan of the schedule. I think it's a fine schedule if hybridized appropriately. And I will tell you this, it's much easier to hybridize it appropriately in a large school than it is in a small school. One school in your state, about 3,000 kids I know that has operated this schedule for a number of years. About 20% of the classes in each block of the day are in an AB format, and about 80% are in a semester block format. It's pretty easy to mix and match the right classes back and forth when you're a school that large. When you got 300 kids in the school and you're trying to AB something, you almost always have to have perfect matches, meaning if you're taking AP US History, you're also taking Honors English 11, and we AB them all year long. So at the same time, the 4x4 schedule was being developed around the country. There were a variety of other secondary block type schedules that gained some traction. And these are the AB block schedules. And the AB block schedules are when classes meet in double length and meet every other day. We had a few schools in my state of Virginia that operated on a 6 AB schedule where classes were about 2 hours long, met every other day. And this didn't last very long because they taught 5 of the 6, which meant one day every other day. They didn't have a planning period, so that wasn't popular. We still have a number of schools in our state who operate a 7 AB schedule, and it's kind of hard to do that with an odd number of classes. So one of them has to be a skinny. So as you can see here, period 5 or class 5 is about 50 minutes, lunch is 30 minutes. And the rest of the classes, and that class meets every day, while the rest of the classes meet every other day in this model. Some schools add in a day when all of their classes meet. I encourage you, if you do that, don't do it on Friday, because that's an encouragement for teachers to give tests, which will not be well received by the students in there. Most people who do have a day when they meet all their classes make it Monday in the schedule. And in fact, this school, Atlee High School, this was modeled after in Virginia, actually did away with Friday after the first semester of this schedule and just went on a straight alternation. I won't stick with that long. The most common of the block schedules in the country is an 8 AB schedule where kids take classes every other day, all year long, if it's a full credit course, and every other day for a semester, if it's a semester credit course. The lots of choice in that schedule. Teaching load is typically 5 or 6, 5 in very affluent districts, but 6 everywhere else in the schedule. The biggest issue with this schedule in terms of is adapting instruction to it.
Well, some places got a little bit of snow, but I didn't get no snow. Yeah.
Somebody's got their mute button off. I was talking about smoke or something. And this is a very, very common schedule, teaching like typically 6. This is the schedule my son's middle school is on in Henrico County. 4 classes every other day for students, 3 classes every other day for teachers. He's a math teacher. He loves it, but he's into, project and problem-based learning and groups and all that kind of stuff. So it suits him quite fine. It is, again, as I mentioned before, a one-size-fits-all schedule in that all classes are offered in this format. And so there becomes a debate often in schools about that. What level of frequency, what level duration is appropriate. And so you have some schools that would decide they were going to do a hybrid schedule where might run periods for 3 days of the week, showing Monday, Tuesday, and Friday here. Lunch is built in and around that, and blocks on Wednesday and Thursday. So each class across the course of the week meets 4 times, 3 shorts and a long. Some people might put this on a pattern versus a weekly schedule. They might do it in a 4-day rotation, 2 periods, 2 blocks, 2 periods, 2 blocks, and so forth, rotating over the holidays, the weekends, and whatnot. All of that is kind of a compromise among departments on the level of frequency and duration. Other schools might, block a little bit more and have that one day where all classes meet. And in this particular case, classes would meet 3 times a week. Or we might put it on a 6-day rotation with 2 days of periods and 4 days of blocks, and just keep rotating through that. They're all kind of adaptations on the theme of the hybridization of periods and blocks together. One thing that has come up many times in my work over the years is that a lot of people, especially in this newer wave, the first wave of block scheduling is probably in the early to mid 90s. The newer wave has been since 2015, I would say. Well, there's been increasing disgruntlement with the length of class periods for the kind of instruction we want to engage our students in. And so those schools with a 42 or 45-minute period aren't happy with that period length. But when you talk to them about the possibility of various schedules, they're not all that keen on something that's double that length too. So a number of schools have adopted schedules where the class period is in a kind of sweet spot of about 60 minutes. Now, we had that back in the 6-period day, but if you were to repeat that, you would reduce students' choice 2 classes to get back down there. Most secondary school schedules around the country, or a lot of secondary school schedules, certainly in Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey and the metro areas here, are based on 8 courses, 8 periods, eight something. And we'd have to go back to a 6-period day unless you just don't meet them all every day. And so that's where we end up with the drop scheduling phenomena, which is caught on in your state and in New York and in New Jersey. You will find lots of schools with rotating drop schedules. This particular school's from mainland, Bell schedules from Mainland Regional High School in New Jersey, about 1,800 kids. There are 3 very interesting things about this schedule. Their day is kind of short, 6 hours and 39 minutes. I suspect if we were to calculate it out that their periods would be about 40 minutes long if they had 8 classes and lunch, if we had a regular period type schedule. But they don't have that. They have a drop. And so only 3 of their 4 morning classes meet every day. So as you can see, that pattern snakes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, with kids having 3 classes a day, and each one of their morning classes meets 3 days in the 4-day cycle. That's true in the afternoon, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the drop is interesting. The other interesting thing about that is the rotation. Teachers and students alike love rotations, rotating schedules. Why? Because no one class is always my 1st-period class. When Johnny's always late and I never get to see him, or when we're all tired or whatever. No class is always my one right before lunch when everybody's antsy. No class is always my one right after lunch when, when they've been running around outside if we're in middle school or whatever. And no, one class is always my last period class in the schedule, too, where we're all tired. It's based loosely on the rotations and preference for them. It's kind of based on learning styles theory, which basically says we're all different and we all learn and teach better at certain times of the day. So it kind of spreads out the pain and the gain throughout the schedule. In my work, when I work internationally with independent schools that are where English is the language of instruction, the most common schedule I would see in those schools would be this schedule, the 8AB schedule, but they put it on an 8-day rotation, rotating all of the blocks, 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8. Day C would be 3, 5, 7, 1, 4, 6, 8, 2. Day E would be 5, 7, 1, 3, etc. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do that in the States? A few places do it. They tend to be mostly independent schools. We don't do it for 3 major reasons, I think. Shared students, part-time students, kids who go off to a tech center, a gifted center, something like that. We can't do that full rotation with them because it doesn't match up with the schedules of those centers. Part-time teachers who might work another job, that would be a problem for them. And shared teachers, it would mean the other school would have to be on the same rotation to share them in that pattern. So this school is paired up with the tech center, but their kids can take 4 classes in the morning and 4 classes in the afternoon at the tech center, or vice versa. So that's why it's done this way. The other interesting thing about this schedule, and this is our jumping off point into a discussion about the unit lunch, community lunch, lunch and learn, whatever you want to call it, is this unit lunch. Theirs is only 50 minutes long, including transitions. And this school, the largest school I've ever seen do it, 2,700 kids, Cherokee High School in the Lenape Regional District, 2,700 kids. All kids, all students have it off at the same time. I've only seen it in middle schools a couple of times. In independent schools, with very small numbers, 150 kids might have a lunch together in a middle school, something like that. In a K-12 school that, the elementary school has one lunch, the high school has one lunch, the middle school has lunch. There's only 500 kids in the school total. I've seen it there. I've seen a couple of schools. There is Bronxville Middle School in New York, and I think Camp Hill Middle School have open lunch, they're the only middle schools I've ever seen with lunch with parental permission, kids are allowed to walk downtown and pick up a sandwich or a piece of pizza or something like that. They have unit lunches there too, because a lot of their kids go out. 95% of the campuses in the country, and like 99.999 of middle schools, don't have that kind of open lunch. But this has become a popular addition to schedules throughout the country because of its multiple purposes, not just the community building aspects of the common lunch period, but also the possibilities for intervention, enrichment, and other kinds of activities during that time. And to discuss that with you a bit, I have a brief video that we'll show parts of here that was created by the folks from the Lenape Regional District. It's quite good. We'll watch about 10 minutes of it, and you can have access to that.
For years, high school lunch has meant going to the cafeteria, waiting in line, sitting with whichever students have been assigned the same lunch period, eating and getting back to class, all in less than 30 minutes. But for students in the Lenape Regional High School District, the conventional lunch period has been reimagined. Beginning with the 2015-2016 school year, the Lenape District has implemented a community lunch and learn period. During this 50-minute session, students and staff alike are encouraged to take advantage of the numerous resources offered by their school before, after, or while they eat.
Lunch and Learn is new, but it's a lot of fun, and it gives a lot of opportunities for kids to do like what they want with their time. I do a lot of my homework and I study a lot during Lunch and Learn, and I can also socialize with a lot of different groups of friends.
Lunch and Learn gives the opportunity for teachers to meet with students and students to meet with teachers if they're struggling, or if they have to make up stuff when they're absent.
It's a nice break in between classes, and you can just like do all your homework and you have enough time to do everything.
During lunch and learn, I sometimes go meet with different clubs, like French club meets during lunch and learn sometimes, which is like all different clubs, or like I go to meet teachers if I need extra help or just make a task kind of stay at school. So really you can do like anything during lunch and learn.
It's been good for them to have some social interaction time with friends. I think this year being on duty, it's the first time I've seen a lot of them not use their cell phones and just talking to each other, which is good to see.
It's a nice experience, and it's nice to like mingle and meet other people from around the student body.
It's a great break from how the schedule has been. It gives us more time to interact with some kids that we might not necessarily get a chance to work with during the day.
Kids who are in sports, have work after school, get to be involved. It's a really, really nice way for them to get to their teachers when otherwise they would have to only do it at 2:30.
I really like lunch and learn because you get to sit with all of your friends, you're all together at the same time, and then you can do your homework from the day before or homework that's due the next day while you're still eating your lunch.
I definitely have more time to go to like club meetings and do my homework and things. So before I'd have to stay after, and it's just more convenient this way.
In middle school, we'd just eat lunch in like a quick 20 minutes and then go outside. While here, it's like you get to choose what you want to do with your time, whether it's eating lunch or like doing your homework and catching up on schoolwork.
After touring other high schools that use a similar lunch format, Lenape district officials developed the community lunch and learn concept. Each school's principal established an organizational structure designed to allow students an opportunity for freedom and self-direction, all while under the watchful eyes of teachers and administrators. Upon its initial implementation in the Lenape district, administrators and Board of Education members personally toured the community lunch and learn to see its effectiveness firsthand.
It's a great spot.
Students can bring their lunch or purchase food in the cafeteria or at any one of the many kiosks located around the school. During community lunch and learn, most areas on campus are open to students, giving them numerous options for where and how they choose to spend their time.
I'm in the South Cafeteria at Cherokee, which is a pretty popular section in the first half of lunch and learn, which is my duty on days 1 and 3.
Beginning of the year, I was supervising out in the gym courtyard, which was pretty nice because you get to go outside in the middle of the day.
My favorite thing about lunch and learn is probably eating outside because it's fun to do, to sit with my friends and catch some fresh air.
We just choose to eat outside because we're inside all day, and sometimes we just need some fresh air, and it's usually pretty nice out, and we have like nice umbrellas, and we all come together outside.
The first day I chose the media center because it was the only air-conditioned part in the school that I actually enjoyed a lot. And with frequent access to the computers and these large lunch tables, we could accommodate all of our friends in one single place.
During lunch and learn, I supervise in the North Cafeteria on 2 days where I have duty, and then I'm also down in the band room for rehearsals when I have off days, when I'm down there working with the kids.
I'm in the band. I come to the band room to practice 2 days or 3 days out the week. Or I just go to the media center to get work done.
What takes place during the community lunch and learn is entirely student and faculty driven. Students use the time in a way that best fits their needs. And teachers, who alternate daily between supervision duty and free time, are available several times each week to meet with students and clubs.
I like lunch and learn because it gives me a good amount of time to eat all my food completely, and do my work if I have any that is needed for next periods after lunch or work that's due the next day.
I usually do my homework after I eat lunch, and if I'm not doing my homework, I can also go to like club meetings or to the silent study halls that they have.
This afternoon, I'm giving a test in one of my classes, and some of the students were saying they don't quite feel prepared for it. So they asked if they could meet at the end of lunch and learn, and I'm happy to do that, to meet with them to help go fine-tune whatever areas they need help on before that test.
I definitely use the time to socialize a lot. I'm usually always out here with my friends. And if I have schoolwork, I usually just go to like the media center to study there. It's really nice and convenient.
Most days, if I don't have lab, I will eat and then I'll do homework or study. And a lot of times I'll have club meetings. So instead of just eating, I'll be going to clubs, or I'll go see teachers for extra help, or I'll be doing homework or just getting ready for whatever my next class is.
On Wednesdays, National Honor Society students, we come down to this room to help with some of the autism students. We like to get back, and it's really cool to work with the kids. We eat for the first little bit, and then we do a craft or game. We play a lot of board games. We work on different questions and speaking. It's really fun.
We were able to bring in a couple guests from Towson University, to their head of their jazz department and the head of their overall music school. They came up and did a clinic with our kids during lunch and learn, where I was able to get all of the music down to the band room for the lunch and learn period. And they were able to watch those guys perform. They got a chance to talk about what college was like. It was just a great chance for those guys to, have the opportunity during the school day to come down and be a part of that.
It's really good that we had this lunch and learn, because we would not have had the opportunity to play with the musicians that we had the opportunity to play with today. We performed for us, answered any questions we had, and it was a very good experience.
With the freedom to use their time as they need, it's no wonder why Community Lunch and Learn is so popular with students and staff.
It's different from last year because you can do a lot more things. I really like the kiosks in the hallway. They're very nice being there.
You can actually go places now. You can go outside. You can go to different classrooms. It's really amazing, and I really like it.
Last year, I only saw a couple of my friends, and we only had a few minutes to do what we needed to do. And this year, we can see all of our friends and have enough time to eat your lunch and also finish all your homework you need to get done.
A lot of my students work right after school, so they're unable to stay after school, whereas Lunch and Learn gives them that one-on-one tutoring, or that if they're coming with a couple other students, a group session to really understand and spend time on their academics that they normally couldn't. They can't really say, no, I can't stay after school, because now we're not asking them to stay after school. We're asking them to come and use their time wisely during Lunch and Learn.
The Lunch and Learn opportunities for students to seek out their teachers is just a benefit that is phenomenal. A lot of students are involved in sports, and whether they have games or practices right after school, they can't meet after school. So this gives them an opportunity during the school day to meet with their teachers.
My AP theory class, I'm able to do extra sessions to try to build up some skills with that I don't have to normally take class time for. If there's certain kids that are struggling in areas, we can address those. I'm also pulling in my jazz band kids to run sectionals during that period. And, it's just...
So I'm going to stop that because you get the idea. Again, it's the Lenape Regional District. If you just put in Lenape Lunch and Learn, you will find 5 or 6 videos about that. Each one of the high schools has one of their own. A lot of questions come up, and I'm going to stop for questions in a bit here. I've gone on too long. I'm sorry. I just get rolling. But a lot of questions come up about Lunch and Learn. It's like, well, how do you staff it? What is it in a teacher's contract? And in that particular district, I think the way that it works is this: the teaching load in that high school, I believe, is 5 classes out of 8. And that means each one of those 5 classes meets 3 times in 4 days. So 3 times 5, 15. That's 15 of the boxes in this schedule are then filled with instruction in a teacher's schedule. There are 24 boxes, not including lunch ones. So that means there's 9 empty boxes, or an average of 2 a day. Teachers are guaranteed a prep period every day. They're going to have generally at least 2 or sometimes 3 empty boxes on a particular day. When one of their empty boxes, the second one, abuts the lunch period, either falls here or here, that becomes the teacher's lunch period. And then the teacher is able to work with students during the student's unit lunch. That's the way some schools handle that. Other schools, if you had a teaching load of 6 in this, that would be much more difficult because there wouldn't be that frequency of abutting the lunch period, and that teachers having two or more periods every day. And so what some of those schools do, which is you have a couple of high schools in the state that I'll probably get something wrong here and hear from them, but in Lower Merion, their 2 high schools operate this schedule. I would use them as an example. They have the longest Lunch and Learn period that I've seen. And if you take a look at this here, they have a 7-hour and 10-minute day. So good length day. And I'm looking at B day because A day is when they have advisory. but 60 minutes, 56, essentially 56-minute periods that meet in the pattern that we saw earlier. And their lunch and learn is 63 minutes in the middle of the day with a 5-minute transition into it and a 5-minute transition coming out of it. So a total of 73 minutes. The way this is divided, my understanding is 30, a 3, and a 30. And in schools that do it like that, often that is because the teaching load is higher and they need to, you heard all those teachers talking about working with kids and kids talking about working with teachers. Well, teachers got to have a lunch period too. And so this is the way we guarantee teachers a lunch period in here. One of the 30s is designated as theirs, and the other 30, they could be available based upon contract, if it's allowable, to work with students, to run a club activity, to do a supervision, etc. I'm a fan of this. I think it's exciting. I think it's kind of a little training ground for kids in time management, because one of those 21st century skills we're supposed to be giving our students is self-direction. And how do we do it? Well, we tell them what to do every minute of the day. And so during this time, kids, if they have full freedom rights, and that is not the case for some students sometimes, get to choose what they're going to do within the parameters of the rules of their particular school, which allows them to go certain places and eat certain places and all. The default activity for a student in the lunch and learn is lunch. You can be with your friends and you can eat your lunch. And if you need extra help, if you think you need it, you can seek it out. If you want to be in a club, you can go to it. If you want to, you're in the band and they're having an extra rehearsal, you can do it. But the default is lunch. If you have nothing else to do, you're not cordoned off somewhere, you're in lunch. Now, I think I recall correctly that this school has kind of 3 levels of freedom in it. And that is, the first level is for most students who they are free to make their choices within this because they behave properly and they perhaps don't need any extra help. The second level of freedom, which is just slightly lower, is for a student who needs extra help. A teacher can mandate in many schools that have this kind of lunch and learn that they attend one of the 30-minute sessions in the lunch and learn for an extra help section. So it gives you a kind of mandatory, either mandatory or voluntary, but extra help time. And that could be very frequent for a kid. So if it's only once or twice, maybe we're thinking about it as a tier 1 extra help. And if it's daily for 4 weeks, maybe we're thinking about it as tier 2 intervention that a kid's getting during this time in there. And of course, all of this has, there's a lot of contractual issues that crop up with it. I mean, I've put a list of things that one has to do to make it work in the presentation, and that is not an exhaustive list at all. I mean, it is a massive undertaking, but it's got some pretty good reports. I was working. One way to think yourself through this is, I always make a chart. If I can,
superfood or whatever, it's like that.
I'm hearing somebody talking. If you are,
like where you,
I'll stop in a moment and entertain questions. But let me just show this and then I'll entertain some questions here. This was the school I was working with in Wisconsin. And we were setting out to create a structure for their lunch and learn period. And they had decided, it was a small school, it was going to be on a 6-day cycle. And we showed each day as 2 30-minute periods. There was a transition between them. And small school, this is the staff, 3 English teachers, 3 math teachers, whatever. And this was our way of structuring it. Everybody had to get lunch, one of the 30s. Those are all in there. Notice that one day a cycle, each department had time to meet with each other because they had no student responsibilities. So that PLC meeting time was built into this on a rotational schedule. And then we also were working on, well, what are the supervisions that we need covered? How many people do we need covering them? We started assigning those to various people in the schedule. It was just kind of a worksheet. It's a way to think through some of the details of what has to be done with this. I'm going to stop yapping right now. And I know there are probably some questions that have showed up in the chat. I have not been following them because I can't seem to do that multitasking. But if our coordinator here would like to shoot a couple out at me, I'd be happy to respond.
Absolutely. I would encourage everybody, if you have questions, this is the time to get them into the chat. But Dr. Reddick, one of the questions that I did record along the way was in relation to scheduling software, and how do you place a drop schedule or drop rotating schedule into software like PowerSchool? Do they have those capabilities? Is there other software that maybe better supports that, or is that something that has to be done by hand?
So it's a drop schedule is an 8-period schedule, and the main issue with it is ensuring that the patterns that you have give a teacher a planning period every day in there when you have it. I'm not aware, I don't follow the rules of all the various scheduling programs that are out there to know how you would put that in there. And my suggestion to folks would be to call the consultant for the company that whose software program you have and ask them how it's done. I don't know. The short answer is I don't know how they do it, but it's still basically an 8-course plan is what it is.
We had another question about the concept of student flexibility. Could you run through those descriptions one more time?
What do you mean the concept of student flexibility? I'm not sure I understand that question.
The flexibility that students have during that lunch and learn.
So, at the high school level, most places that do that, students have choice. The locus of control of what a student does during lunch and learn is with them. They get to make their choices unless other criteria are present. And the ones I gave were, well, one criteria would be you need extra help, and your teacher has identified for you for extra help, and they mandate that you attend one of the 2 30-minute periods for that extra help. Another criteria might be that you have a disciplinary issue. You've not been acting appropriately during the unit lunch. And as I recall, Lower Merion, they have a place they call the will room, where you will come here and stay in this room during this time frame during unit lunch. It's essentially lunch detention that a kid has who doesn't handle the freedom well. So each school sets up their own parameters for the freedom allowed for students during that time. I've worked with a couple of middle schools that do this, and I'm jumping into middle school just to give an example. And this was in New York, Warwick Valley. The high school was on a drop with a unit lunch. 5-8 middle school attached to the high school. They wanted to be able to have some of the 8th graders go up to the high school and take courses, and they wanted to share teachers, some core teachers down to the 8th grade as well. So the high school block was the drop that you saw earlier, and the 7th and 8th grade block was also the same drop. The 5th and 6th grades were on a totally different bell schedule. But the interesting thing about the unit lunch was the 8th grade had a unit lunch, but it wasn't mixed with the high school. It was only in their building. And the 7th graders didn't get freedom in that unit lunch until the end of the first quarter, after they'd gone through an orientation procedure, which occurred during the first half of lunch, where they met, they learned the rules about it, learned what their opportunities were, and all that sort of thing. So some schools do restrict, the middle schools I've worked with that have toyed with this concept usually wean kids into it. And almost all schools have a place for a student who doesn't handle the freedom well to go. Any other questions that you have there?
Those were the 2 that came in when the session opened, and I haven't seen any more to this point.
Hopefully they didn't all leave. So where are we right here? We're at 2:23. So that's unit lunch. There's a lot more that you could we could talk about with that, and people probably have lots of questions about it. My advice would be find schools nearby you that do it and go visit them. That's always my advice. They'll talk to the people who are actually doing the work. I'm this generalist who, you know, who cross-pollinates schools in a way. And so it's always great to get out there and see other people doing the kind of thing that you're thinking about trying to do. So there's 2 other high school schedules that I'm going to talk about before we take a break. And they are the drop block schedule and the 5-block trimester schedule. This schedule that you see here, which is, I think, still the Bell schedule for Wissahickon High School in Pennsylvania, was developed first in Chappaqua, New York, with Horace Greeley High School. And it takes 2 scheduling concepts and marries them together. And it's the notion of a drop schedule, which happens on the first 4 days of the schedule, and then a block schedule, which occurs the next 2 days of the schedule. This does not have a unit lunch, though you could certainly build this with a unit lunch, and I'll show you a school that has it with a unit lunch in a moment. This has 3 separate lunch periods that are built into it. And so if you look at the meaning pattern, and we'll just look at the top chart, on day 1, we have course 1, then homeroom, then 2-3, and day 2, 2, then homeroom, then 3-4, and day 3, 3, then homeroom, then 4-1, and then day 4, 4, then homeroom, then 1-2, dropping a class each day. Same meaning pattern in the afternoon as well. So if the first 4 days of the cycle, each class meets 58 minutes in this, 3 days out of the 4. They morph into a block schedule after that, where now the classes are 80 minutes in length. The odd classes, 1, 3, 5, and 7, meet on day 5, and the even classes meet 2, 4, 6, 8 on day 6. And on those 2 days only, they have an intervention enrichment period. I'll talk about that later. That period is 48 minutes in length. And they probably argue with me about this, but 48 minutes, 2 days a cycle. Wissahickon is a fairly low intervention needs school, and most schools I would work with who have an intervention period, they have it every day because they need it every day because of the intervention needs that are there. So this is an interesting schedule where everybody gets 3 shorts at 58 minutes and then 1 long at 80 minutes every 6 days in the cycle. And it also embeds into that schedule 2 intervention enrichment periods. Could you embed a daily intervention period into this schedule? Sure, you could. You would just have to steal minutes from the drop classes. If I wanted, say, a 45-minute class, essentially, I'm going to have to steal 8 or so minutes from each of these, and so the periods would only be 50 minutes in the rotation then, and then I'd pick up that that intervention period there. I will tell you that both the unit lunch and the intervention enrichment period, you're more likely to find them in school schedules that are blocked because, say you're on an 8-period day and you have 8 45-minute periods. If you want to run an intervention enrichment period as your 9th thing, well, I got to find minutes for that. I'm going to take 5 minutes away from each of my periods. I can tell you right now, you take 5 minutes away from each of 8 45-minute periods, you're going to hear howling in the wings for teachers who are upset about you shortening their periods. However, if you were in an 8AB schedule, you got 4 90-minute blocks, and you say, well, we're going to take 10 minutes off of each of those blocks to create a 40-minute intervention period, you are likely not going to hear much objection. It just feels that different when it's coming out of a block than it does when it's coming out of a period. So this is a very interesting meeting pattern, I think. Again, the 3 shorts and the long every 6 days. That's the way the classes meet. Again, the morning and the afternoon are separate, so the rotations for the morning are separate from the rotations for the afternoon here. I did say that there was a school district that I work with, and that was the Cherry Hill Public Schools across the river from Philly, who do this schedule. And we went through a big process there to get there, 2-year process. And their schedule looks somewhat like, let me find the matrix, there it is. Somewhat like that, where they have the rotation of the class. You see the snake here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And they have a unit lunch, and then they go into their blocks on days 5 and 6 in the schedule. Their periods are actually longer than this. This was based upon their original school day, which was 6.5 hours. They now have 7 hours. So the periods in their drop schedule are 57 minutes, and I think the blocks are 87 minutes in it as well. And I actually have that bell schedule, and that is their actual, where is it? Well, I thought it was not in here. It's in here. There it is. Here it is. Their actual bell schedule, which you probably get online. You can see the 57-minute periods. Here's the snake pattern, A, B, C, D on days 1 through 4. And then they morph into their blocks, which are 87 minutes on days 5 and 6. But notice how they denote half the lunch period. They kind of have a 4-minute transition into a 25-minute chunk, and a 4-minute transition into another 25-minute chunk, and then a 4-minute transition into the afternoon rotation of classes in there. And that's strictly in this district for the scheduling of special activities. Teachers have the full time off, and teachers are stipended or use club time in that. And some give extra help out of the goodness of their heart, which is not a way to institutionalize extra help in the schedule. So the last model that I want to show you that's used by high schools, but not hardly at all on the East Coast, is a 5-block trimester schedule, this thing here. It's very similar to the 4x4 schedule in some respects. The school year is divided into 3 trimesters, and the 5 blocks are about 70 minutes in length. Each full credit course gets 2 trimesters in this schedule. It's used fairly significantly in Michigan, a few schools in Wisconsin, and then out further west. Only know one school in New Hampshire that does it. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about it. A class lasts 120 days here, and it can be true. You could have the first half of algebra here, and then no algebra here, and then finish it here. Still 120 days of instruction, or you might not start algebra until second trimester. There's aspects of acceleration in here. You can accelerate a semester within here. You can credit recovery a semester too. Kids can earn 7.5 classes. You can embed an intervention period if you want, or you launch into this as well. But it's an interesting schedule, but it's not used much at all on the East Coast. It is used by middle schools sometimes, but not in this format, not with core classes being trimestered. The way I've seen this used by middle schools is in Prince George County, Maryland. A number of their middle schools had a block every day for ELA, a block every day for math, a block every day for science, and a block every day for social studies. And then the 5th block had to include everything else, world language or PE or your electives or whatever. They were struggling to meet state standards. They devoted 80% of their time to the basic core. And within this 5th block, kids took 2 things that met an A-B schedule. And that's the way it was done in those middle schools that did it that way. So that's kind of the end of the high school scheduling model piece and our discussion about the unit lunch. Just to review, about half the high schools in the country are on some kind of period schedule. The most common is 7-period day with a teaching load of 6. about half the high schools in the country in some kind of block. The two most common schedules are the 8AB schedule and the 4x4 schedule, typically hybridized, but there are lots of other hybrid period block schedules and drop schedules and trimester schedules that are out there. Middle schools use some of these. Middle schools do not do trimester block schedules, do not do the 4x4 schedules, rarely do drop schedules, but they do all the rest of those schedules that I talked about earlier. So we're going to take a little break right now. I've got 2:33. And let's come back. All I'm going to do is pause my camera and mute myself, and I'll be back to begin at 2:50. If you have any questions, please write them down during the break, and maybe I'll start out at 2:50 responding to a couple of those questions that you have. When we return, I'm going to focus in on more middle school specific schedules, and then we'll spend a good deal of time also talking about the intervention enrichment period, both at the high school and at the middle school, a useful thing in an MTSS system. Okay, stopping share and stopping video. See you at 2:50.
So Dr. Reddick, one of the questions that popped up during the break was, have you seen a community lunch or a lunch and learn work with middle schools, and what did that look like?
I did, I commented a bit on it, and I've seen it with very small middle schools, maybe 150 kids in the whole school, especially when that school was either part of a 712 building or 612 building, and there were two separate lunches, kind of a high school lunch and a middle school lunch. I've seen that. But the one that I've seen it in independent schools, which are often pre-K through 12 schools with, 2 or 3 sections a grade. So I've seen it there. I've seen 2 middle school open lunches, which are not the same as a community lunch. They were just kids were allowed to leave campus. And the only school that I've really seen who had the middle school lunch as described as a unit lunch, community lunch, was that in Warwick Valley, New York, which is the one I shared a few minutes ago, where the 8th graders, the high school was separate from the middle school, had their own unit lunch. The 8th graders and 7th graders mixed into it, but the 7th graders were weaned into it over time. They didn't have that complete freedom at the beginning of the time that they implemented the unit lunch. I don't think it's impossible to do it. I think there's some, a lot of schools build a structure that sort of looks like it the way they do lunches. So a lot of middle schools will have in 3 or 4 different periods, a period that is divided in half, where half the kids in that period go to lunch, while the other half are in some kind of study hall, or they might call it an intervention period, but it's really tough to do that the way and then they flip the 2 halves, and then they do that in 2 or 3 different periods of the day. And so the structure is almost there for it, but generally the opportunities and the freedom aren't provided in it. So that's what I have to say about that. I haven't seen it much, really. Only one school that I've seen. I don't think it's impossible, but I do know that most middle school administrators are like, let's make lunch as short as possible. We do not want to supervise it. Sorry, I forgot to close the door here. Another question?
Yes, sir. How does a drop schedule work with co-op and internship opportunities for students?
So the answer to that question is, let me go backwards here. It's very difficult with internship type things that aren't half-day opportunities. So I don't think it would work well with that. And if it's not in an increment of half the day, it's problematic. I have seen a few schools who lock down a course at the end of the day. So for example, I could have built this schedule where period 9 always met in the third period slot and move the other ones so that 9 never goes out of that place. I suppose I could do that. It would only be 3 days a cycle, and the kid wouldn't be free every day in that. But I think it's a really good question, because the drop schedule, as you see it here with this rotation, is very difficult for co-op and for internship possibilities that aren't a half day sort of thing. Blocks, an AB block schedule would work much better for that, because the block isn't rotating, it stays in the same 2-period slot. So it works better there.
2 more questions, a little bit more general. One of those is, what schedule overall do you think has the most potential or is the most effective?
There's been, people often ask me the research question, and there was a lot of research done in the 90s and early 2000s comparing this schedule to that, and the sum total of all that research was pretty inconclusive. One study might have favored one schedule over another, so there's been no conclusive answer to what is the perfect schedule or the right schedule, and or we wouldn't be talking here. We'd all be on that particular schedule. I do think that, I don't tend to be a fan of, 8, 9, 10 period days. I think the periods are way too short for the kind of instruction that we want to do. There's aspects of lots of schedules that I like. I think that a hybrid 4x4 schedule where some things meet every other day all year long and other things are semesterized happens to be a favorite of mine, but can I prove it's the best one? I cannot. Okay, I cannot. I like the way it lowers load. It makes for a more manageable life for teachers and students while still giving them a fair amount of choice. And it gives period length that gives you the opportunity to do a variety of different instructional activities. So there is no perfect schedule. I tend to like a hybrid 4x4. There are aspects of this schedule I like. I tend to be a bit of an incrementalist. A lot of the schools that opted for this kind of a schedule, they would never go to a 4x4 schedule. Their communities wouldn't allow it for whatever reasons. And so this was better than what they had, which was an 8 or 9 period day with 40-minute periods. It added a few nice attributes. It cuts down the number of classes a kid has per day. So it makes a step, so.
And I think given that response, the next question, the final question we have here is probably just perfect timing. What kind of questions should you be asking to help to guide people who are working through building a new schedule or making adjustments?
So, what are your goals? What are your goals? What are the attributes of the schedule that you want? What are you trying to accomplish with the schedule? I mean, a lot of times, people say they feel hampered by short periods. Well, there are some scheduling types that are implied by that. Kids need extra help in the schedule, but you don't want to take them out of a regular class. Well, there are adaptations to a schedule like an intervention period or a community lunch that we could do, that we could add to a schedule that. So it's kind of, what are your goals? You also do, I have people do an analysis of their current schedules. What are the good things about your current schedule you like? What are the things that you don't like? If there could be a perfect schedule, what attributes would it have? Often knowing that there will be conflictual attributes mentioned in there, in that. And so I tend to go through a process with people when they're looking at, most people call me, have very specific ideas about the kind of things they're trying to accomplish with the schedule. And so, while I show them the full range of possibilities, they kind of quickly zero in on a particular schedule type or two. At the middle school level, often the calls that I get that precipitate the questions that you're talking about have to do with a very specific academic problem. We're trying to do MTSS. We need a place to do tier 2 interventions. What you got, or our math scores are in the toilet. How can we, and we're working on curriculum, we're working on instruction, but we really don't think there's enough time in mathematics to teach the full curriculum. How can you help us, So it's what are your goals? What are your non-negotiables? If I'm working with a middle school, I might ask, what's your non-negotiables? I'll ask a question about teaming. Is teaming a non-negotiable for you? Must you have teams? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no. So I guess it's about, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And often we use that set of goals or preferences as a lens in a matrix to analyze the scheduling options that are out there. And so, for example, I think I have an example. I don't find it here. Yeah, so this is Cherry Hill, and there were a variety of different issues that were of importance of them to consider across the top of this matrix. And then there were the options that we were considering. And then we use this as an analysis tool to go through and see which of the schedules might best meet the most number of these desires in the schedule. Usually in a process, and in a process, the process typically starts administratively with support from the central office. And I generally recommend that if there are any non-negotiables in the process, that they be clear and upfront to the people who are going to be engaged in it. Often, there are things like in Cherry Hill, we had some non-negotiables. One was the kids in that school to take 8 classes couldn't have lunch. So one of our non-negotiables was you got to be able to take 8 classes and have a lunch. That was one of our non-negotiables. Another non-negotiable was in that school that the schedule couldn't cost much more than the current schedule. That's almost always one of the non-negotiables. And a third of the non-negotiables was there has to be a institutionalized structure for extra help for kids. It's not a course. And so that's why we were looking at IE periods and the community lunch and things like that. And it's best, I think, that there be a very small number of non-negotiables, or you hamper yourself too much. And then there can be other preferences that you have, some of which will be met to a lesser or greater degree, but knowing full well that certain kinds of schedules are better for certain kinds of desires that a school district might have. So I think I better get going on middle schools here, and I want to, if that's okay, and I'm going to talk about middle school scheduling now. And I think when Kennedy and I wrote the book on middle school scheduling, we based it around 8 questions that we thought were important for thinking about kids that age. And here are some of them. What's the appropriate number of students a middle school teacher should see each day, term, or year? Do we think there's a relationship between how a teacher works with kids and the number of students assigned to them? And we all know the answer to that. Yeah. There's even a book out about that. It's called Total Student Load, TSL, by William Ucci, I think. And his hypothesis is, and he proves it with his research anyway, which is pretty limited, but interesting, the achievement is related to the number of students for whom you're responsible, and the greater a teacher's total student load, the lower student achievement, which is related to this question right here. What's the appropriate number of teachers for middle school students to see? I work in the New York suburbs a lot, and a lot of the elementary schools I work there are kind of rapidly self-contained. They don't do any teaming. No 2 teacher teams, 3 teacher teams in 5th grade or anything like that. So they're self-contained right up through 5th grade. And then what do they do to their students when they go to middle school? The typical middle school schedule there is a 9-period day. So we go from one teacher to, with a little, period of music, art, and gym, every once in a while, to a 9-period day with 8 different teachers every single day. And they wonder why some of their kids' heads are spinning off, How many teachers should, when kids come up from there, they should see fewer teachers than an 8th grader does who's preparing to go to high school. I think one of the opportunities we have that I always take advantage of when I'm working with District K-12 is, what are those junctures, and how, when we write curriculum, we try to be cyclical and recurse things through various years of a kid's education, and we make sure that there's a K-12 curriculum that it recurses and makes sense throughout the grade levels. We don't really think that way with regard to Schedule 2. What is, we think in boxes: elementary schedule, middle schedule, high school schedule. We ought to probably think K-12. Shouldn't a 5th grade schedule be more similar to a 6th grade schedule at the middle school than a kindergarten schedule? Maybe an 8th grade schedule ought to be more similar to 9th grade than what's happening in 6th grade. Maybe team size is smaller in 6th grade than it is in 7th or 8th if we're middle school. So those are some things to think about that. Probably the key question that we have when we think about middle school scheduling is, how do we want to divide the day up in terms of, and this is a false dichotomy. It's not really fair for me to do this. I make a simplistic definition of core as being language arts, math, science, and social studies. Language arts including reading, math, science, and social studies. And then encore is everything else, where language, PE, technical education, family consumer science, music, everything else. And in a lot of schools, they treat world language as core, at least in some grades. But it's a useful demarcation just to think through how we want to spend our time. Time is our currency in the schedule. How do we want it to be utilized? And how do we want it to be utilized to meet our goals? And so the question I often pose to middle school folks when I'm working with them is, what percentage of the school day do you think students should be engaged in language arts, including reading, math, science, and social studies? You might think about that for a moment. In aggregate, the amount of time that students in middle school should spend in language arts, including reading, math, science, and social studies. You think it's 50%, 60%, 2/3, 75%, 80%? The answers will differ around the country. They differ around the country, not so much geographically as to type of community, but that the most common answer I get is 75% of that time ought to be devoted to language arts, including reading, math, science, and social studies, that sort of basic educational program we provide all students. 25% to encore, core and encore. The range is 50% to 80% for core. I've worked with some schools where only 4 of 8 periods in the day are devoted to language arts, math, science, and social studies. And I've worked with other schools where, as I described earlier, in a 5-block schedule, 1 block language arts, 1 math, 1 science, 1 social studies, and 20% of the day to encore. All those exist. And what's right for you is dependent upon your needs for your students' achievement growth. Then there's a corollary question to that, which is, okay, say you think that 2/3 of the time ought to be spent in language arts, including reading, math, science, and social studies. How should we divide up that time among those subjects, equally or unequally? Is one of those subjects more important than others? And the same corollary question can be asked of our encore subjects. Are there any that need more time than others as we're trying to build that part of the schedule? So depending on how you answer those questions, you conceive of different kinds of schedules. So at the middle school level, my primary middle school scheduling, we often think of a variety of different schedules, and I'm going to start with where we think the core ought to be divided equally, okay? It ought to be divided equally. meaning language arts, math, science, and social studies. Now that could be in a 6-period day with 2 encore periods, in a 7-period day with 3 encore periods. It could be within an 8-period day with 3 encore periods and an IE period and just 4 core periods. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could divide the core equally. The ones I see most typically are in a 6 or 7-period day. So from a conceptual standpoint, in a 6-period day, you might see a middle school schedule where 2/3 of the day is spent in language arts, including reading, math, science, and social studies. And a third of the day is spent in the encore classes, selectives and exploratories and things like that. And to give you an example of that kind of schedule and tell a bit of a story, I worked in Chappaqua, New York. I've worked there many times, continue to work there. And their middle schools are on a 6-period day, which is pretty unusual for a place like Chappaqua and for middle schools in general. They started out with an 8-period day. They had 9-period day. They had 9 40-minute periods. One of those was lunch, and every student was required to have lunch, thank goodness. And then they had 8 periods. 4 of them were the basic core, language arts, math, science, and social studies. So all kids were getting was 40 minutes of language arts, 40 minutes of math, 40 minutes of science, 40 minutes of social studies every day. They were structured into teams of 4, and that team had 5 periods. So there was an extra team period in there. And that was generally used for a bit more language arts and a bit of enrichment and extra help kinds of pull-out services, AIS, academic intervention services, but was universally regarded as pretty much a waste of time the way it was utilized. Then there were 3 encore periods. One was daily world language. One was PE and music that met every other day in a 40-minute period. And the third was a quarterly rotation of encore classes like art and tech ed and family consumer science and health and things like that. So that was the basic structure of their schedule. They were unhappy with a couple of things. They were unhappy with 40 minutes in general as the length of a period in their school for the kinds of instructional activities they were engaged in. And even in the rarefied air of Chappaqua, which if you know where it is, and it's where the Clintons live in Westchester County, 40 minutes wasn't enough to deliver a full language arts program. 40 minutes wasn't enough to deliver a full math program. So they were not unhappy with that. And so we met with a group of, there's 2 middle schools there, 5-8 middle schools. And we met with administrators and central office folks and a teacher too, and came up with a scheduling proposal that's essentially this. Let me blow it up a little bit so we can see it, I think. Well, I guess that's as big as I can get it right here. Why is my view not working? View. Oh, there it is. Zoom. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so you see 6 55-minute periods. We started out with 6. They only had a 6.5-hour day, so it was hard to get as much instructional time as we wanted. They wanted a little homeroom too. We started out with 6 56-minute periods and a 30-minute lunch, but the teachers formally had a 40-minute lunch and squawked. So in the negotiation around this, lunch got extended and the periods got shortened a bit. And the white ones that you see there are core. So now that team of 4, language arts, math, science, and social studies, has a 55-minute daily period versus the 40-minute daily period they had before, which was a significant increase in instruction, 37.5% increase in each of those classes over the course of the year. We took their former 3 classes that they had, 3 encore periods, and collapsed it into 2. Well, how do we do that? I mean, we're in Chappaqua. You don't take anything away. You don't reduce choice there. That's going to get you looking for a new job. And so we didn't do that. We reduced frequency. So to be able to provide all that they'd gotten before in these periods of now 55 minutes, but only 2 of them, we changed the meeting pattern of their encore classes. And this is in your handout. Let me find it here. Here it is. So these are the 2 encore periods. Here's a 3-day rotation. Their world language class that formerly met every day for 40 minutes now met only 2 days of 3 for 55 minutes. Their quarterly rotational classes that formerly met every day for 40 minutes for a quarter now met 2 days out of 3 for 55 minutes for a quarter. Their PE class that formerly met every other day for 40 minutes now met every third day for 55 minutes. And the music class that formerly met every other day for 40 now met every third day for 55. All kids were in band, orchestra, choir, general music. So the period length was welcomed by all. 50 minutes, 55 minutes was better for instruction in all of these areas. Certainly, family, consumer science, art, tech ed, all that, Spanish, BE music, they all enjoyed the longer period. Well, how do we get the longer periods? Well, we reduced frequency to be able to squish them into 2 periods. And I will not say they were all happy with the reduction of frequency. They will not. When we got the schedule built and had, vetted it with the teachers, got their input, and we're pretty much settled in on the plan, we had a couple of parent meetings, shared the schedule with them. And one of the charts that we prepared for that meeting, I won't go into all the details of that, although pretty interesting the way they were constructed in that school. It was a technique known as a knowledge cafe we used, but we created a chart that did a time comparison. So if you look at English, Math, Science, Social Studies here, in the former schedule, they met 180 times a year for 40 minutes each time for a total of 7,200 minutes. In the new schedule, they made 180 times a year for 55 minutes for a total of 9,900 minutes, or an increase of 45 hours of instruction over the course of the year for each one of the 4 core subjects in those 55-minute periods. That's a 37.5% increase right there. Where did the time come from? Well, they did away with academic enrichment and the lit thing that was that fuzzy 5th period that nobody much thought was worthwhile. And then they reduced frequency of things. World language, 180 40s became 120 55s. World language lost 10 hours over the course of the year. PE, 90 40s became 60 55s. They lost 5 hours. Music, same drill. Each of the quarterly courses lost 2.5 hours. Now, I could make an argument that 55 minutes of a PE class, once every 3 days, you'll get more exercise in it than you will in 40 minutes of PE class every other day. You're probably changing your clothes most of the PE class in that case. I could argue that any one of these tech ed or art classes are better in 55 minutes, and that you could probably teach about as much as you did in the past. But I will not say that the reduction in frequency was welcomed by those teachers, especially the world language teachers in there. Now, I could argue basically they start world language in 5th grade there, and kids get it every day. And by the time they're done with 8th grade, they go to level 2 in 9th grade. And it seems like they probably got enough minutes to get to level 2 by that time. So that's an example of one kind of process and a chart that helped us in a process and a schedule. There is one thing I wanted to add to this schedule. I wanted an intervention enrichment period in the schedule, and we didn't get it. And the superintendent was intent upon keeping the periods at their greatest length. I said, well, why don't you just increase it today a half hour? Because you got a short day anyway. She says, can't get away with that yet. Because then they'd have a 7-hour day. And if we did that, we'd have a 30-minute intervention period in this as well. Because when we took away that 5th fuzzy period, we took away easy access for pullouts and kind of some supports. And so it was a bit of a tactical move on her part anyway, because she felt that too many things were pullout support and she was trying to do more push-in support. And this forced that issue. But some things just don't work well as push-in support, and so there was no easy place to do that in the schedule. Okay, let's get out of that. So that's an example of a schedule where the cores are treated equally. And let's go now to another example of that, and we'll coast through a few here. So that was this. Some places will make the cores equal but longer and do encores shorter, as you can see right here in this concept of language arts, reading, math, science, and social studies. They're longer. The encores are shorter in there. And that schedule, when you build it out as a schedule, tends to look something like this. We'll use this 6th grade option here, where, you know, the 6th grade has a couple blocks and then lunch and then a couple blocks, and then there are 2 encore periods. The 2nd grade has a couple blocks, 7th grade has a couple blocks, and then there are 2 encore periods and then lunch and a couple blocks, core blocks. And the 8th grade starts with their encore. And so the periods don't line up perfectly, but the encore are each separate and done by grade level in the case of that. And this one had 65-minute cores and 45-minute encores in it. So that's not an unusual schedule. When somebody wants to do 75% of their time in core, but have equal division of the core. So the next thing that people do is they say, well, we don't want equal division of the core. We think certain things are more important. And usually the first thing that they say is more important is language arts. And often the case is that that becomes, sometimes it becomes a unified block. It depends whether the teaching load is 5 or the teaching load is 6 periods in the school. If it's a 5 teaching limit, then it usually becomes 2 separate courses, because a teacher teaching 5 periods can't do 3 blocks. They can only do 2.5 blocks. And so then it becomes an English and reading course, which I would say is probably not best practice. You want a more unified approach to the teaching of those two. Sometimes there's certification reading purposes for doing. We got reading people and they aren't allowed to teach English, and so we do it that way. But this does give some more time in that. But we've now had to go on to a 7-period day. So we're in a 7-period day with 5 core periods and 2 encores in this. And this is sometimes done as an 8-period day with 5 core periods and 3 encore periods, occasionally done that way. Notice though that my periods in the 6-period day were, you know, right around an hour, and my periods in the 7-period day are right around 50 minutes, but my ELA people are getting 2s, so they're not terribly unhappy. They get 100 minutes right here. But my math people went down to 50. And then if we're in an 8-period day doing this, and my ELA people are pretty happy, but my math person is now really unhappy because they don't feel they have enough time to teach their curriculum to 80% of their students well. And so what happens now is we start thinking about, well, maybe we need to do something about mathematics too in terms of doubling it. And so a very common schedule in your state and across the country is a middle school schedule we call the 4-block schedule, where kids daily get a block of language arts every day. So unified together. Block of mathematics every day. Science and social studies either meet as separate periods every day, blocks that meet every other day, blocks that meet by units, blocks that meet by quarters, blocks that meet by semesters, the science and social studies. And then generally, the last block of the day is broken into 2 periods for the exploratory and elective periods in the schedule. This particular schedule has a teaming structure that supports it. There's 4 different teaming structures that support it, 2, 3, 4, and 6 teacher teams that can be utilized to deliver that schedule. I'll just briefly share them and comment on them because it is a good schedule. So in the 2 teacher team, usually 50 kids, 2 teachers, one's ELA social studies, the other's math science. I take a group ELA reading, you take a group math, we flip. I put on my social studies hat, you put on your science hat. We flip back and forth either by periods or alternating blocks or whatever. Weakness of this LA group becomes this math group becomes this LA group. So you're tracking kids by whatever subject you're grouping by. It's a problem. So, but it is nice transition out of elementary school. You're not likely to ever see this in 8th grade unless you have the right certification for people. But it's very common in 5th or in 6th grade. In 6th grade in the middle school is a transition out of elementary school. Sometimes people will put 2 of these teams together and treat it as a 4-person team while they're still delivering the pattern that I'm showing here. And the main reason of that is so they can have 2 ELA classes parallel to each other and 2 math classes parallel to each other and mix the kids across them so it's not tracked the way this is done right here. The next teaming structure that works with this is a 3-teacher team. 1 pure language arts person teaching 3 blocks of language arts a day all year long, a sweet job. Math person teaching 3 blocks of math, again, a sweet job. This person is multi-talented, and they teach both science and social studies, utilizing the time within that block as determined in their district, maybe every day, maybe every other day, maybe by units. Who knows? Don't use this much except in 6th grade. Occasionally use it in 7th grade and 8th grade when I need a 3-teacher team because of numbers in 7th grade and a 3-teacher team in 8th grade. And then what I'll have on the 7th grade is a 7th grade language arts teacher, 7th grade math teacher, and a social studies teacher who's going to teach both 7th and 8th grade, and a science teacher who's on the 8th grade team. They're going to teach both 7th and 8th grade science, and they flip back and forth. So that's the way we use that sometimes. The typical team in this is a 6-teacher team, and it's very, very flexible grouping wise, because I always have parallel language arts groups occurring, parallel math groups occurring, which allows me to mix kids in science and social studies with true heterogeneity if I want to. A lot of times in middle schools, we make the false promise that, well, yeah, we group a little in language arts and we group a little math, but science and social studies, that's heterogeneous. Well, yeah, if you're grouping in language arts and you're grouping in math, and the kid's, you know, in the Latin class and takes orchestra, he's walking around with the same kids all friggin' day. And because of the way the schedule is structured, this allows more mixing to occur. Some of you are looking at this last block. Come on, this is a conceptual, everybody is not in Encore at the same time here. There's a different block for each team. And so that's the way that is. So this is a very good schedule. A lot of people would do this schedule and add in a intervention period. So here's an example of a school that I've worked with in Wisconsin. You can see the structure of their schedule. They had a 7-hour and 10-minute day. The schedule is built on 10 40-minute, 9 40-minute, and 1 43-minute period at the beginning of the day for announcements. So it's built on 10 periods. 2 go to ELA, 2 go to math, 2 go to science and social studies. There's 2 encore periods. There's a lunch recess period and an IE period built in. Lovely. While the 5th grade and the 6th grade are flip-flopping in lunch and recess, the 7th and 8th grade are in IE, and vice versa. If we need to make a group that includes 6th graders and 7th graders, we just need to flip their lunch period, and we could do that. So it's pretty flexible in the way we do this. The teaching load in this for core teachers is 3 blocks and the IE period. They get 2 preparation periods. 1 is individual, 1's their team, and then they have their lunch recess as well. The teaching load in this for encore teachers is either 6 encore periods and IE or 7 encore periods in general. And then depending on the team size in this particular schedule, I might have a 2-teacher team in it and a 3-teacher team or a 4-teacher team or whatever they happen to have. In this particular school, 5th grade had 5 sections, so they had a 2 and a 3. 6th grade had 6 sections, so they had 1 6-teacher team. 7th grade had 5, so they had a 2 and a 3, and 8th grade had 6. And so that's the way we did it. Every once in a while, I run into a situation where the school district says, we want more time in language arts and math, but we don't need double what we're getting in everything else. And so there's schedules that you can create that provide that. And the first time I ever built that schedule, I don't think I gave a copy of it in here. The first time I ever built that schedule was in Saudi Arabia. And it was in the Aramco schools. Somebody out there has some experience with that probably, which fine school system is. So the Aramco schools are owned by the Saudi Arabian Oil Company, and many Westerners work there, and we don't fit into their culture, so we live in compounds, and there's school systems in each of the compounds. And this one in Duran Hills had 12,500 people in the compound, and they had their own elementary school and their own middle school, which was a 6-9 middle school. Kids in 10 through 12 went either to an international school outside the compound or to boarding school, paid for by the company, because money was not an object, it was coming out of the ground. And so if you look at the basic blocks of the schedule here, this team of kids here, which is 4 sections, has 5 core periods, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, an elective, a world language, and a fine arts and PE period that alternates every other day. For that particular team of students, which they cohort schedule, which means they track together in their core classes, they did that for purpose there. Everything's heterogeneous in this school. And also they have a fair amount of transients. So they want to bring kid into one group, not 5 different groups, to bring them into the fold more quickly. So if you look at this schedule, it's on an A-day, B-day pattern. My 6A group has a double period of language arts on A-day, then a 15-minute break. That's kind of humane. Let's take a break after teaching for a while. I guess we'd have to supervise the kids. We probably don't want to do that. And then they have math for 45 minutes that day. And then they have their elective. Then they have the best lunch period in the whole world. And you notice 60 minutes lunch right down the middle of that schedule. And that's because they all go home. And then they meet, the language arts teacher works with group C for a block, has a planning period, and then works, that's teacher schedule, I was doing kid schedule. The kid after lunch has social studies for a block. Then they have their fine arts or PE class, and then world language. The next day, ELA doesn't get the block, math gets the block. ELA gets the period. Elective meets as usual, lunch, science today, not social studies, fine arts or PE, world language. So in essence, language arts gets a block one day, a period the next. Math gets a period one day, a block the next. It's 1.5 periods on average in there, a little more time. So I've also done this schedule in the States, a number of different places. What did I just do there? Okay, a number of different places in different formats. And I did put one of these formats in the handout here. It's kind of hard to read, but in this particular format, rather than, you know what, I'm going to show you another version of this. If you want this version I'm showing now, just shoot me an email. I'll send it to you. Monroe, where is Monroe? People have said to me that block one day, period the next is kind of funky for math teachers. For language arts teachers, you got to block one day. You're just going to do a lot of writing that day, I think. And I couldn't find this the other day either. Monroe. There it is. Okay. So this was an interesting school, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. They put their IE period at the end of the day. Not a good idea in my mind. Do not think that's a good idea. Why? You know why. Okay. We're all tuning out. It's an excuse to go to orthodontic appointments, all that. But they were in an athletic conference about an hour away up in Madison. And a lot of their kids, especially the 8th graders, were missing a lot of time because they were in junior varsity sports. And so we put one of their encore periods in the IE period at the end of the day, and they didn't miss much core instruction. That's why they did it that way. I didn't like it, but I don't get to decide. And so world language, almost all the 7th and 8th graders took world language. Well, if you only have 2 encore periods, and a kid's taking world language 1 and band in the other one, how are they getting PE or anything else? You know, if band's meeting every day, even if it's meeting every other day, it'd be hard. And so we needed a 3rd encore period in the 7th and 8th grade. So in the 6th grade, the program was double ELA, double math, single science, single social studies, 2 encore periods. In the 7th and 8th grade, we decided we're going to divide this middle period in half for the language arts and math teachers to give them about 65 minutes every day, the same length. And so I had to construct the master in 3-period chunks so I could do that. So there's the 3 for 7. Here's the 3 for 8. Okay. So if you go down and look at the 7th and 8th grade schedule, 7th grade schedule, you can see, you know, if you were in, these groups didn't track together, but if you were in 7th grade, you had the first 2 periods of the day in encore. And then if you were in section 7-1 in language arts, you had a period and a half of that, which was 64, 65 minutes. And then you were in either of those math classes for 64 or 65 minutes. And then you had your lunch. And then you drop down into the science and social studies part of the schedule. Social studies, your 3rd encore, likely world language, and then your science period right there, and then IE. So every kid got essentially 65 minutes of language arts every day, 65 minutes of math every day, and 42 minutes for everything else every day, except in the 6th grade where they got 87 minutes of ELA and 87 minutes of math because they got the double. That's kind of the, and this is a whole big brain dump very quickly. I really realized that this schedule is kind of hard to follow. There is an example of it in the handout that was actually developed with folks at Rose Tree Media outside Philly. This is it. These are the 1.5 period blocks of language arts and math. I'm not sure if they still do it or not, but it's also a very difficult schedule to team. And you're really not teaming much if you do this because it doesn't come out even until 12 sections are in the schedule. What do I mean by this? A language arts teacher can teach 4 sections in this. A math teacher can teach 4 sections, whereas the science and social studies teachers can teach 6. So if I have 2 social studies teachers and 2 science teachers, that's 12 sections of each of those. I need 3 language arts teachers and 3 math teachers. That's 12 sections of each of those. So the team would be 3 language arts, 3 math, 2 science, 2 social studies, 10 different people on the team. Hardly a team, but it is an interesting allocation of time in the schedule and way to get a bit more language arts and math time without reducing choice in the encore periods because you still maintain 3 encore periods. So next, the IE period. We need to talk about the intervention enrichment period. And I want to talk about that in some detail. And the first time, I'm going to talk about it from a high school conceptualization first and then morph it down to middle school. First time I saw this period at the high school level was in your state. It was at Garnet Valley High School. And they were on a 4x4 block schedule. I'm not sure they still are. I worked with them a couple of years ago. They were thinking about changing. I'm not sure what the change year would have been. Maybe this year. And so I'm not sure what happened. When COVID hit, maybe that blew up a lot of plans. They had an 80-minute block, then a class change, then an 83-minute block, and then a 5-minute class change, 83 minutes for announcements, and then the enhancement period. 45 minutes every single day, okay? 3 lunches in 3rd block, 1 before, 1 after, 1 in the middle, and then the 4th block, 80 minutes. 4x4 semester block schedule could just as easily have been the Bell schedule for an 8AB schedule in there. The enhancement period in their school was on a 6-day cycle. Every day, different things happened in that 6-day cycle. And the locus of control and what happened in that, and what happened each day was basically under the control of the students unless they lost their right to have control over it. Now, I'm going to say some things that probably weren't true in Garnet Valley about the way the period is used here, but I've worked with many schools who have this kind of period, and lots of schools do some of the things I'm about to talk about here. And so I know that Garnet Valley had a sign-up system that they developed themselves. This has been around about 20 years there, I think. And they had developed their own code for it, which was amazing at the time. You don't have to do that anymore. There are all sorts of sign-up systems, either standalone or parts of school programs. I know Sapphire has a module. I know eSchool Plus has a module. I know Power School has a module where you can sign up for things on different cycles that are not regular year-long or semester classes. But they were on a 6-day cycle, and at the end of D-Day, every 6-day cycle, students were required to get into the sign-up system and pick what they were going to do the next 6 days in that cycle. And at the end of D-Day, all students were supposed to have signed up. Of course, some didn't. And, schools handle that differently. Some remind them with, email reminders and get them signed up. Some assign them to something like an academic detention study hall because you didn't take care of your right to make your own choices. And then class lists are prepared for teachers and reminders are done for students. That all used to be done in paper at Garnet Valley. And now that's not necessary. We can do all of that electronically. So it's much simpler in that regard to that. But about 1,300 kids, I guess. Everybody had to be somewhere. It's quite a challenge. You got a program for everybody. So the basic structure of an enhancement period or an IE period at the high school level, it has to be something like this, I think. And I've got various features in here that are in different schools, not necessarily Garnet Valley. One thing I would caution you against, and one thing I don't like about the way some people try to begin doing a intervention enrichment period at the high school level, is that they do the same thing at the middle school level. I don't think it works particularly well there either, is they create this kind of standalone period like we have here for the enhancement period, and they assign every kid to an advisory or a home-based type group. And then the way intervention is handled is it's done by a pass system, where a kid, if they need help from a teacher, gets a pass to go to see that teacher, or either from that teacher or they request it from their home-based teacher. And so every teacher then has a group of students they're babysitting and another group of students who might be coming into them to get some extra help. Not everybody needs extra help, so there's the ones left in your room. You got these others you're supposed to be. That doesn't work. You have math teachers got 20 kids still in his room and another 10 come in for intervention. How does he deal with that? You have to have a system, I think, where everybody in the system is only doing one thing at a time in terms of the activity they're trying to engage in. And so if you look at my chart here, which is a conceptual chart, not anybody's actual chart, I show a number of things in this period. Advisory. Many schools, high schools, middle schools have an advisory program. It's probably necessary. Some hardcore middle schools want it every day. Most do not. Most, if you could have it once every 6 or 5 days, probably sufficient time. So we take up 1 day a cycle in here with advisory. It's a pretty common thing for middle schools who have this kind of period to do it about once a cycle. Advisory is interesting and controversial in high school. One of the more interesting ones I've seen isn't truly kind of an advisor, it's more an advisor. Wausau West in Wisconsin, 1,800 kid high school, they're on flex mod schedule too, 40 minutes of advisory, or they just call it homeroom, every week. Every teacher has 3 9th graders, 3 10th graders, 3 11th graders, 3 12th graders. They graduate their 12th graders out every year, get a new crop of 9th graders in every year. And their responsibility for those students is as follows. Get to know them organically over time. Monitor their grades, monitor their 4-year plans, be the go-to adult for that group of students for the 4 years they're in high school. And it's part of their tracking of students and their monitoring system of how well students are doing in a variety of different ways. I really kind of like that. So you see that. You also see something that says DPT, department meeting here. A lot of schools use the enhancement period to run PLCs out of. I got a 45-minute period here. I have all the teachers available. I have all the students who need to be somewhere. In any schedule, I'm not using all my teachers every period. If you're in the 4-block schedule I just showed you earlier, 75% of my teachers are with students each block of the day and 25% are planning. So in this case here, I'd like to give every department 1 day off during the 5 that are left after advisory, So I'd try and get about 20% of my teachers off each day. Right there, I'd still have enough teachers to comfortably cover all of the students in the school. And I would have built in, without blowing up my regular schedule, a time for departmental planning. Or, by the way, this does not have to be by department. If it were middle school, I'd probably make it by department, because in the regular schedule, I probably got it by grade. And so I might now do a multi-grade level departmental meeting during this time. And it can be whatever structure you want for who is off during the same time there. And then what we have is a mix of intervention and enrichment opportunities that are suggested by this chart. And so let me describe the way I see this operating. Say I'm a kid, I'm taking Algebra 1, and I'm a conscientious student, and I get a 50 on a quiz. Well, because I'm a conscientious student, I think to myself, I better get some help. I messed something up on that quiz. I don't know what it is. So I get into the sign-up system, and I sign up to go see my algebra teacher for 2 days next cycle. Well, I work with her, and she helps me correct the conceptual misunderstanding I had. And I'm fixed. I don't really need to go back anytime soon. It wasn't a big problem. I just messed one thing up. It's kind of tier 1-ish. You know, a lot of times I joke about the sort of MTSS model, RTI type model, and, you know, tier 1 intervention is supposed to occur within the regular classroom. It's supposed to be differentiation of instruction. And my question to folks is, well, so how's that working out for you so far? And I usually get smiles and nods when I ask that question, because it's a tough row to hoe, especially at the high school level, I think. I mean, some people can do it, but this is kind of a reconceptualization of tier 1 intervention. It makes it easier for the teacher to deliver. I sign up for an intervention. I go see my teacher for a couple of days. There's maybe 10 kids there. We each get a little help. We're fixed. It's kind of tier 1-ish. Now, more likely is that I'm taking Algebra 1 and I'm not a conscientious student, and I fail the quiz, and I don't really care. But my teacher does. And she gets into the sign-up system a couple of days before I get into the sign-up system, and she selects me to come see her for a couple of times next cycle. When I open the window 2 days later, then she opens the window to go ahead and sign up for what I want to do during that time period, I discover I've been signed up. And so now I'm required to go attend that extra help session with her. But again, you know, I just miss one thing. She helps me. I'm fixed for the moment. And I don't really need to attend again. It's kind of tier 1-ish. On the other hand, we've got an Algebra 2 teacher who has taught the review unit at the beginning of the school year, reviewing those Algebra 1 concepts. She gave her assessment to 100 kids that are in her sections and discovered 15 of those students bombed it. She knows from data from previous students who have bombed that assessment that they are unlikely to be successful in the course going forward unless they get a lot of extra help, and a couple of times with that teacher won't fix them. So for the next 6 weeks, 2 or 3 times a cycle, they are scheduled in to work with that teacher or another teacher to work on those skills that were found to be deficient in that assessment. At the end of whatever prescribed time period they do that for, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever you decide is necessary, you give another assessment. If they've mastered those skills, then they're out. If they have not, then they're still in. That's tier 2. And it's variable in length based upon student need, which is not something we have built into regular schedules very much, unless you have a period like this or the community lunch structured as we talked earlier. All of those things, the departmental planning meeting, the advisory, the tier 1, tier 2 intervention, are the easy parts of this period. The harder part of this period is, what are we doing with everybody else? At the elementary level and sometimes the middle school level, this period is not called the intervention enrichment period. They give it a name that implies a broader perspective. It's called WIN, what I need. And so it implies that our mission is not just to provide intervention, because often when you say intervention enrichment, the only thing anybody hears is intervention, and the enrichment goes by the wayside. And so WINS is what I need, and that's what every child needs. And so we've got to provide programming for every kid in this, and it's got to be something that is worthwhile. And that is not easy. It's a tough road to hoe to provide something that everybody sees as worthwhile in this period. It involves the creativity of your staff and the willingness to provide those kinds of activities. When I work with Wissahickon, I have a few lists of theirs, and somebody could probably correct me and say, oh, they're not doing it that way anymore, but I think they might still be. But let me go to a list of the activities that were provided for students just in, I think it was the first year they did it. Let me find that. Come on. I'm sorry. Where is it? Oh, maybe it is an IE. Okay. So these are by department. These are, almost everybody who offers the IE period offers extra help in the courses the kids are in right away. So the basic English courses that kids might be in, typically help is available in those. And then there is a variety of enrichment opportunities. These weren't offered every time. They were the ones that were offered over the course of the year. Now, how do you glean this? How do you get them? Schools doing this IE period, they put out a call to the various departments. What are the interventions? Usually there's a scheduling committee, an IE period committee that's charged, led by an assistant principal who's in charge of making it work as part of their job responsibility. But he has an advisory group of teachers and students to help him construct make the decisions around it. They send out a call to the various departments. What are the interventions you'll need to provide to students over the course of the year? How many kids do you think will need that each time we offer it? Are there more sometimes of the year when you think you might need more? What are the enrichment opportunities that your departmental members are willing to provide in this period? Those come in from each department, and then it's the job of that assistant principal, with the advice of the teachers and students and other administrators perhaps on that committee, to build the grid that you saw earlier. And so these are the things that were created by the folks at Wissahickon in their first year of doing this. And you can see some of the enrichment activities. Math has a pretty specific bent, except for Sudoku and juggling. SAT and SAT prep, that'd be nice. Good use of time. You can see science, world language, etc. They had about 600 different things that were offered over the course of the year. This is a challenge, okay? Now, when you compare at the high school level, when you compare the community lunch to the intervention period, I would say that the community lunch is it's got its own set of issues that you got to deal with food, especially in supervision. But the thing about the community lunch, you never see both of these in a school. I've not seen a school that has both, because they have overlapping purposes. Plus, if you had both, you'd be sucking so much time out of the day. Your periods or blocks be so short, universal instruction would suffer. So you can't do both. And so schools decide to do one or another. And I'd say at the high school level right now, it's tending towards high schools favoring community lunch. At the middle school level, they're favoring the intervention enrichment period because they're scared to death of the community lunch. And so at the high school level, I would say the community lunch is a bit easier to do. And here's an example of why I say that. I've worked with a few school districts where they had an intervention period at the high school level. They put it at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, because kids who didn't need intervention could leave early or come late. I hated that it meant that intervention was punishment for anybody who was required, and good luck getting them to come to get it early or to stay to get it late. So I never was a fan of putting that period at the end of the beginning of the day for a lot of reasons, but also for letting it be sort of only those who needed had to stay or wanted to stay for a club or something like that. I don't like it. I just don't like the message it sends. And the reason they did that was because it got a whole bunch of kids out of the building and it made it easier to manage. Well, in a way, community lunch is like that because you don't have to program for everybody. Because the default for kids who don't need extra help and don't happen to want to be in an enrichment activity or club at the time is lunch and social time. You don't have to program for everybody. In an enhancement period, enrichment period, IE period, you have to program for everyone. There has to be something productive for everyone to do. It is more challenging to do. And so middle schools tend to do this more. They tend to not offer if they offer any choice at all in it, it's not nearly as much as is described in this, where every 6 days kids were re-signing up for what they were going to do, okay? At the middle school level, we tend to have various approaches to the way that we schedule the IE period too. So your elementary brethren down in K-5, when they schedule an intervention enrichment period in their RTI or MTSS models, they had typically the most common format is a different period of the day for each grade level, and a SWAT team of support joins the classroom teachers during that period to provide smaller group size and a variety of supports, both enrichment and intervention. At the high school level, we can't do that. We can't have a 9th grade period, a 10th grade period. That doesn't make any sense. We have multi-grade level classes. It doesn't work. We have to have a school-wide period at the high school if we're going to have an intervention enrichment period. And you know, that's the way it's going to be. Now, the middle school can be somewhere in between, and it often depends on resources. So I have some samples here. I think they'll pop up. They're nothing that, hopefully they'll pop up. Come on, it's probably behind this. It is, okay. So here are examples. They're all in blocks, but you'll get the idea. Some people put their periods beginning of the day or the end of the day. I work with had a gal from, I think it was Springfield Township, the Spartans. Maybe somebody's there in one of my sessions one time. I think it was Patan's session out at State College. And her schedule, she's on a 4-block schedule, and they have their Spartan block first thing in the day. I fussed at her. I said, why are you putting it there? Kids are going to come in late. They're going to be tired. They're not going to like it. She says, be quiet. It works great for us. She said, they all come in on the bus. They love what they're doing in the IE period, so they get all ready for school. And for some of the kids who get an intervention, it's kind of pre-teaching for the day. She says, leave me alone. It's working great there, okay? So they put it there, but it's a school-wide period. Here's another one where it's at the end of the day, also school-wide. I don't like it, but sometimes middle schools will do it because it buffers other things like sports and things like that. Okay, that's next. Sometimes I prefer to have that period in a middling period in the day if it's a school-wide period. Why? And this would be true for high school, because it's kind of a break in the action, you know, teach a block, and we have this different thing. And then we're back to our regular teaching. It's a change of pace. It's a change of pace for kids and teachers alike. So putting it in a middle place is better. I tend not to like it around lunch, unless you're doing a community lunch. I don't want to get confused at all with lunch. So often it's after first block in a block schedule. By the way, you're much more likely to see these periods or in a block. I think I said that earlier, just because to take the time out of a period schedule shortens the periods too much. Okay, so next, a lot of if a middle school has some specific intervention staff, and I don't mean special ed staff, I mean reading AIS providers, math AIS, in intervention people whose job is to provide like tier 2 interventions, or they're reading specialists or math specialists or something like that. They will occasionally not have a school-wide intervention period. And that's because they can SWAT team those people like their elementary colleagues. If I got 2 reading teachers and 2 math teachers, and I can slot them in with 8th grade here and slot them in with 7th grade here and slot them in with 6th grade there, and then the rest of their work is for tier 3 out of encore periods or something like that, I'm getting a lot of bang for my buck right there. And so schools will sometimes have different IE periods for different grade levels, and they'll even take it to the extent where they might have different, this is an example of a school, both of these are examples of schools that has 2 teams at each grade level, and we created 6 non-conflicting IE periods. Again, if you have the staff, the intervention staff, to flood them in to join a team of, say, 6 teachers, I got 4 other people joining, I can get class size, I can get a lot of extra help done by scheduling it that way. The fact is that most of the schools that I work with around the country don't have anybody like that. I mean, they don't have a reading teacher who's just, they might have a reading teacher who's doing all their work out of Encore, doing tier 3 stuff for kids, replacing courses there. And so what I lose when I do this is I lose easy access to my Encore teachers to be part of the IE period. Because like when this IE period is occurring right here, well, 7th grade Encore is going on. I can't get anybody there, Maybe I could get some help from an Encore teacher here, but it's hard. When we do the school-wide periods though, wherever we happen to put them, well, my Encore teachers have all had their planning. They've worked with their 3 grade levels and they're available too. So I got all hands on deck kind of thing there. And they can be doing some of the enrichment activities during that period. So in terms of scheduling it, a lot of it has to do with what is the kind of support or intervention staff you have. If I had 4 intervention people that I was putting into this period here, they can each only take 1 group. So I don't get much bang for my buck out of them. The rest has to be pulls from or push-ins. But if I have, they each get 1 group if there's 4 of them, so that's, I can only do 4 groups there. But if I have a situation where I've scheduled this by team, well, I can get 4 groups here and 4 groups here and 4 groups here and 4 groups here and 4 groups here. I can get 24 groups, twice as many groups. But again, the vast majority of middle school folks I work with, schools I work with, they don't have those people. And so the better alternative for them is this school-wide period. So the school-wide period at the middle school level, when it's done, and that is what I find most frequently at the middle school level, is a school-wide period. There's different ways to conceptualize how to use it. And I've captured those in this slide here. I think, in schools that are like hyper-focused on state tests because they're having a lot of trouble, they're trying to look at their data very frequently. And hopefully there are some people that have been added to the core team during this time. And they are grouping students in their team or at their grade based upon need and assigning them to intervention or enrichment groups among the specialists and teachers available to work with them during that time frame. And it's all data driven. And the groups might last, for 6, 9, 12 weeks, but there's progress monitoring that occurs and changes until a new assessment is given and a retiering is done of those groups there. This is more the elementary model that's utilized, and a lot of middle schools would use this model too. the most difficult part of this, of course, still is the enrichment piece of it. And what are we doing for those kids who don't need that intervention? It can't be a glorified study hall for those kids, well, or something that's created on the fly. I've worked with some school districts, one in Ohio, where we actually had a model like this, but there was professional development occurrence in the summer where science and social studies teachers who were going to provide the enrichment program developed 3-week units that were then inserted in as the enrichment program. They weren't developing things on the fly just to keep kids busy while the interventions were occurring. They had real enrichment units that were available to be provided for students in there, so that was good. Another way to think about it is kids select, through, so I think I'm right about this, that at Springfield Township Middle School, they have a 6-day cycle. For that period, that's the beginning of the day. First day is always advisory, and then there are 5 other days. They run some of their large group performing arts groups there. So if you're in the band, you might have 2 days of cycle where you have a band rehearsal in there. So if I'm a kid, I might have advisor on A day and band on B day and E day, for example. And so now there are 3 days left in the cycle. Once every quarter, I get to go in and look at what are options there, okay? Or teachers could go in, I'm actually combining these last 2 right here. In the first one, teachers make the selection of the kids that need intervention, and then the students are just regrouped among the enrichment teachers for a program without student choice. In the last one, more what I'm describing right now, the teachers get into the system after the hard scheduled things are there. Advisory's hard scheduled, band hard scheduled, okay? And a lot of schools won't put the music in there. I prefer not to put it in there. It's usually in the encore blocks and gives you more freedom for that IE period. But they hard scheduled the music in there. So this kid had A day advisory, B day band, D day band, leaves 3 days open. If he needs extra help in math, his math teacher may have gotten into the system before the kid got in the system and selected him for a day or 2 to help. And that means if that kid got selected for 2 days of math help, a cycle, he may only have 1 free day to pick something he wants to do. And usually there's a list of choices that are available. So let's say his open day is F day, and he scans down the openings there and he selects chess club. That's what he wants to do on F day. So it might be that on A day, he's got advisory, and B and D day, he has band, and C and E day, he's in math help, and on F day, he got to choose something, chess club, and that's what his schedule is for the next 9 weeks. Now, if he happens to get better in math and it's a short-term thing and he doesn't need the help anymore, they could bounce him out of that and let him make another choice in there. And, those choices don't last much longer than they would in the high school model, where the choice part of that occurs maybe once every 6 days in that. So it's a different, there's usually, I like adding the choice aspect to a middle school model. Giving anybody choice makes them take more ownership of what they're doing and what they're involved in. But it's more complicated. It's more complicated. There's a lot of issues that come up with this too. People say, well, what if a kid needs so much intervention, they never get any choice? And you hate something like that. We still have our prime rule of school scheduling. You put something in, you got to take something out. But I do know schools that say every kid's got to have at least 1 day free where they get to make a choice. Okay, so we could do that. The rules are yours to make in a structure like that. But it can be used to help in this whole provision of interventions in the MTSS process. There's a million issues there. A few comments on process. I generally recommend that, most schools spend about a year of research, of learning, decision-making. And at the end of the first year, they've made their choice of what the new schedule is going to be. And then they spend a year doing it right, because there's a lot of things, preparing to do it right, because there's a lot of things you have to do in advance of that. If you would, You know, you got to build a dummy schedule of what you said you were going to do and make sure you can make it work. If there's a change in period length, you got to help teachers learn how to teach in that. If there's a change in time allocated to a subject, you need to redo your curriculum maps and your pacing guides and things like that. If there's a change in the basic structure of the schedule, you may need to redo some policies. Your course scheduling course book may need to be changed too. There's a lot of work that has to be done after you've made the choice to change the schedule. So it's not unreasonable to have a year of research, study, and decision making, and a year of preparation. I recommend a study team, and it's got to include, mostly at the secondary level, we're talking about administrators and teachers, and at some point, students and parents have to be involved. And you have to make the decision when that's going to be. I work with places where they're involved when the committee starts, the students and parents are already on it. I work in other places where the administration and teachers want to get comfortable with the options that are out there first, and then they bring in the students and parents to get their input. Whatever, you got to get them involved at some point. You have to design your decision-making process in advance, okay? And not design it on the fly. What is the role of this committee? What are they allowed to do? Do they get to decide the schedule? Or does this committee make a recommendation to the school administration, which then moves it on up to the superintendent, who puts his or her stamp of approval on it, and then we're done? Or do we have to take it to the school board to get their approval? Are there any, earlier I said, what about the non-negotiables in the process? Are there things that, we as a district or we as a school must have in this new schedule, and don't bring us an option that doesn't have that? Again, I recommend that you not have too many of those. It's also a really good idea to make sure that even though there's a study committee, the study committee doesn't get too far out in head of the rest of the staff, okay? That happens on a lot of different issues. This group, the study committee, goes through a learning process. They learn a whole lot of stuff. They get excited. They come up with a plan. They share it with their staff members who haven't been following along, and they're like, what the heck is this? And so you got to keep them up, and it must be the responsibility of the team members to keep their colleagues who they're representing informed as to the options being considered. Nobody left behind, okay, in that process. I have a kind of tongue-in-cheek thing about how to fail when implementing a new schedule. I think it speaks for itself there. You can look through that if you like, and there's some references, but oh man, I'm tired of hearing my voice. You probably are too. This is such a artificial environment for me to not see faces and reactions and see when somebody looks at me and thinks I've lost my mind and I need to clarify. But I hope you got something out of the session. We've got a few minutes left if there are any questions. I don't know if you've been gathering any questions along the way or not here, but I've stopped the share. And do we have any questions out there?
There were a few that were trickling in, and I think that you addressed a lot of those. They were asking for examples about scheduling intervention time. The one that kind of sticks out to me that I think maybe we could get a little bit more clarity on here at the end is there one particular schedule or a type of schedule, a structure for schedule that seems to work better with small schools that are trying to have, they might have 1,000 students in the whole district. They're a K-12 building with a group of secondary teachers that teach K through 12. Is there a schedule that seems to work in those places?
So the usual issue with that, of course, is staff sharing, because they have, and it's not typically all the teachers, it's a few teachers. It's usually the music first and world language and a few of the other encore teachers that are shared, and then occasionally a core teacher that's just shared among the levels there. And it's been my experience that having a scheduling template that usually is 8 periods with lunch not as one of those periods works pretty well, because that allows me to do some different things across the different levels. I might decide in those periods that at the high school level, we're going to do an AB block schedule or something like that. Whereas the middle school schedule level, we're going to do a 4-block schedule where kids are going to get double ELA and double math every day. And that fits into the same 8-course format. At the elementary school, the 8-course format, the 8-period format, at least for encore, you know, if the periods were like 8 45-minute periods, you know, it's basically each grade gets a 45-minute period for encore at the elementary school each day in a different part of the schedule. That kind of the bones. I'm not saying everything's run in a period, but an 8-course template where some blocking occurs, where it allows us to share encore teachers across the 3 grade levels, seems to work the best in my work. And that's what I usually try to do when I'm working with a small school that shares a lot of staff, a K-12 type school.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
On behalf of Dr. Collins, all my patent colleagues and our participants today, I would like to thank you for joining us and sharing.